Chapter 23-21. Jinyan Lai stood there in a daze for a long time. His mind was in a mess, and his whole body was in a mess. Zhenbao Pavilion took the initiative to give it to her? Didn't this mean that? He suddenly thought of something and sucked in a breath of cold air. A look of horror flashed across his eyes. First Oracle I. Only now did he realize what he had done wrong. Now he had no time to think about why Zhenbao Pavilion did this. He only knew that this time, if he was not careful, he would lose himself. I'll go and take back the Xian formation diagrams that I gave to Mu Yafeng. The first oracle suddenly asked. You gave her the method to break all the Xian formations? Jinyan Lai swallowed his saliva with difficulty, but his throat was still tight. In the eyes of the first oracle, this reaction naturally meant that he admitted it. That's right. Since you've made up your mind to help, of course, you have to help until the end. The first oracle's voice was emotionless. This made Jinyan Lai even more flustered. Just as well. Open your eyes wide and take a good look. See if Mu Yafeng can ascend to the heavens and become a god with your help. Jinyan Lai felt suffocated and uncomfortable. He wanted to defend himself, but he couldn't say a word. Knock knock. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. First oracle, are you there? This was Xu Jing's voice. She did not go to Herb Mountain today, so when she heard the commotion, she hurried over. She was the first to arrive. Jinyan Lai was about to speak when he saw the phantom in front of him suddenly disappear. He wanted to ask her to stay, but she had already disappeared. It was just the aura of the first oracle. He could come and go as he pleased. He took a deep breath and rubbed his face hard. After being the seventh oracle for so many years, he had always been cautious. This time, he was impulsive and went easy on Mu Yafeng. He did not expect that he would be caught red-handed by the first oracle. Although the first oracle did not give him any substantial punishment, this made him even more nervous. He really could not understand what that person was thinking. Was he planning to come out of seclusion? If that was the case, there was nothing wrong with it. But the crux of the matter was, with so many things happening in the illusory god palace recently, why did that person target him? Helping Mu Yafeng cheat was neither a big deal nor a small matter. No matter what, it couldn't be more important than the Lightning Pond and Fengming Mountain, right? First oracle? Xu Jing waited for a while, but he still didn't hear any movement inside, so he shouted again. Creak! The door was opened. Jinyan Lai appeared behind the door. When Xu Jing saw him, he subconsciously looked inside. The first oracle has already left. Jinyan Lai said coldly. That person really came? Xu Jing looked shocked. He's willing to come out of seclusion? That's not right. Why is he looking for you the moment he comes out? Jinyan Lai didn't want to talk too much with her, so she just said perfunctorily. The first divine emissary did not come personally. He only sent a wisp of his aura to ask me some questions. Xu Jing's expression softened a little, but he still felt quite surprised. What's the matter that actually alarmed the first oracle? Jinyan Lai glanced at her. You came here to ask about this? Then you can leave. After saying that, he closed the door again. Bang! Xu Jing didn't expect his actions to be so swift and straightforward. She was so shocked that she took half a step back. When she came back to her senses, she was immediately angry. Didn't she come to ask, because she was too surprised that the first oracle had come out of seclusion? What kind of attitude was this? If it weren't for the fact that Jinyan Lai's status was slightly higher than hers, she would definitely not let it go so easily. Xu Jing tidied her clothes and turned to leave. After taking a few steps, she suddenly thought of something and turned back to look at the tightly shut door. Just now, Jinyan Lai's expression was particularly ugly. Did something happen between him and the first oracle? She thought for a moment and raised her voice. Seventh oracle. I heard that Mu Yafeng has already cracked 6 great grandmaster Xian formations in a row. Aren't you going to take a look? Bang! Jinyan Lai suddenly smashed something. Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. What was wrong with him? Wasn't Mu Yafeng someone he particularly valued? Now that she had an outstanding performance, why was he still so angry? Xu Jing had a bad feeling. She gritted her teeth and finally turned to leave. After that, a few more oracles came to find out what was going on, but they were all sent away by Jinyan Lai with a few words. When Chu Luyue and Rong Xiu left the illusory god palace and crossed the Blue and Black Sea, she deliberately slowed down. Unfortunately, nothing out of the ordinary happened. After that, the two quickly rushed to the god-slaying mound, because it wasn't their first time there, and because their strength had improved greatly. It only took them a short time to get there. At noon the next day, the two successfully arrived again. After passing through the forest, they officially entered the god-slaying mound. Looking from afar, it was vast and barren, bleak and cold. It was no different from before. It was just that the inexplicable coldness and pressure seemed to be stronger than before. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. Chu Luyue frowned slightly. It had been a long time since they had been here, and the god-slaying mound seemed to have some subtle changes. They should already be inside. Rong Xiu looked into the distance and narrowed his eyes. Chu Luyue nodded. Then the two walked forward hand in hand. At this time, deep in the god-slaying mound, Qi Han was holding a long sword and staring at the two in front of him vigilantly. Behind him sat a young man covered in blood. It was Lu Feng. Jiulong laughed. You want to enter here with just the two of you? Chapter 23-22. In front of them was a large area of broken tombstones. A desolate and sorrowful aura slowly spread out. This was the tomb of the honored god. Qi Han and Lu Feng had been in the god-slaying mound for some time. They had spent a lot of time and effort to get here. They did not expect Jiulong and Shi Yin to arrive at this time. As soon as they arrived, they ordered everyone to leave without hesitation. Most of the cultivators in the god-slaying mound had been forced to leave. Of course, not everyone was willing to do so. However, these two were too powerful. Even honored gods could not last more than 3 moves against them. Everyone had no choice but to obey. Jiulong and Shi Yin had entered from the edge of the god-slaying mound, so they were the last to arrive here. They met Qi Han and Lu Feng, who were waiting outside the tomb. The aura of the tomb of the honored god had changed slightly with the passage of time. To ensure their safety, the two decided to wait here until the aura was at its weakest before going in. When Jiulong and Shi Yin arrived, Qi Han and Lu Feng had already waited here for 3 days. As expected, they were also chased away. But they did not agree. After a short stalemate, Jiulong and Lu Feng attacked. After a few rounds, Lu Feng was injured and defeated. Qi Han held his sword in front of Lu Feng to guard against Jiulong's next move. Of course, Jiulong didn't take his actions seriously at all. They were just 2 exalted gods. What was there to care about? Jiulong looked down at the 2 of them. My patience is limited. I can't be bothered to continue arguing with you. I'll count to 3. If you don't leave by then, don't blame me for being merciless. Qi Han said coldly. The god-slaying mound is not anyone's private territory. Every cultivator in the world comes here. You want everyone to leave? That's too unreasonable. 1. Jiulong raised 1 finger. Obviously, he did not care about Qi Han and Lu Feng. He could not be bothered to continue arguing with them. After all, he had already given them the warning he needed. If they insisted on not listening, there was nothing he could do. Lu Feng coughed and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He twitched his lips without a smile. Qi Han, there's no need to say so much to them. If they were reasonable, they would not do such a thing. Shi Yin glanced at the 2 of them and said slowly, That's right. Reason. Don't you know that in this world, strength is the only thing that matters? 2. Jiulong raised her eyebrows. These 2 people were really not afraid of death. Unfortunately, perseverance without strength was ignorant stubbornness. Not only was it meaningless, it would even bring him a lot of trouble. The first messenger only said that the 2 of them were to come and find the last piece of music, but he did not say where it was. The god-slaying tomb was huge. Even if the 2 of them worked together, it would still take a lot of effort to find it, because they were worried that someone would find the music score before them. The first thing they did when they arrived was to drive everyone out. Better to be safe than sorry. Although this would be troublesome, it would avoid some risks. Overall, it was worth it. Most of the people he had met before were quite obedient, or rather sensible. After seeing that Jiulong and Shi Yan's strength far exceeded theirs, they all gave up and retreated. Only these 2 were stubborn. 3. Jiu Long shouted the last count, shook his head, and raised his hand. It's your honor to die in my hands. He did not want to dirty his hands with the blood of the exalted gods. Unfortunately, these two were not smart enough. Vigorous divine power quickly gathered in Jiu Long's palm and transformed into a long sword. The long sword was bright and sharp, and it was covered with a thin layer of frost. Under the sunlight, it shone with a cold light. Then he raised the sword and slashed down. The sword fell silently, but wherever it passed, space was quickly cut open and then collapsed. Large swathes of black spatial cracks appeared, and violent energy surged out from them. Chi Han gripped his sword even tighter. Just as he was about to attack, he realized that he could not move at all. The powerful aura suddenly descended, and he could not retaliate at all. Jiu Long's sword fell from the sky and was about to kill Chi Han and Lu Feng. A bloody wound suddenly appeared between Chi Han's eyebrows. That was an extremely sharp sword energy, and it easily broke through his defense. Jiu Long's eyes were indifferent. Die! That sword flew toward Chi Han at an even faster speed. However, right at this moment, a sharp sound of air being torn apart suddenly came from afar. Swoosh! Then, a bright golden and greenish-black sword light flew from the sky, piercing through the clouds and wind. Clang swish! That sword light and Jiu Long's long sword collided, and then quickly flew up and slashed across. In an instant, sparks flew everywhere. Jiu Long's sword was sent flying just like that. Seeing this, Jiu Long was shocked and immediately raised his hand to call back his sword. The sword landed in his palm, and was still trembling violently. It could be seen how powerful that blow was. He frowned and looked over. That was an extremely sharp long sword. Half golden, half greenish-black, neatly and perfectly blended together. And the glow was bright and heavy. This was, just as Jiu Long and Shi Yin were shocked. Chi Han and Lu Feng had already sensed the extremely familiar aura on that sword. The two of them quickly looked at each other and saw the excitement in each other's eyes. Jiu Long turned his head and looked in the direction where the sword came from. He shouted in a deep voice, "Who is it?" A clear and pleasant voice drifted over with the wind. Ninth Divine Envoy, if you want to kill my people, you should at least ask for my permission first, right? Jiu Long was stunned at first. Then he realized that this voice was very familiar. A name suddenly appeared in his mind. Shang Guanyu. Just as he finished speaking, a woman in a red dress appeared in a flash. Her figure was slim and graceful, and her beauty was unparalleled. Her black hair flew in the wind, and the hem of her dress danced. There was a faint smile on her face, and her starry eyes were slightly curved like the moon, as if they were filled with starlight. Jiu Long's face darkened. It's really you. Chi Han and Lu Feng could no longer suppress their emotions, and shouted in unison. Master! Chu Luiyue came in front of the duo and sized them up. She only relaxed when she saw that their injuries weren't particularly serious. She smiled and said, Don't worry. Fortunately, we're not too late. Jiu Long frowned and stared at the few people in front of him. The two of them are your subordinates. Chu Luiyue turned around and tucked her hair behind her ear. She raised her finger, and the Star Spectre sword returned to her hand. She smiled. Yes. Chapter 23:23. Jiu Long looked at the woman in front of him in shock. He had only used 30% of his strength in that attack, but it wasn't something an ordinary cultivator could withstand. And yet, Chu Luiyue had blocked it so easily. He had heard this name a few times recently. After all, she had caused quite a commotion in the Illusion God Palace. But it wasn't until today that Jiu Long realized that her strength was indeed far beyond that of an ordinary god. You came out of the Heaven Gate? Jiu Long asked. Chu Luiyue smiled and nodded. It's not the first time I've come out. Ninth Divine Envoy, why are you so surprised? Jiu Long choked. He just felt that it was too ridiculous. Most of the cultivators in the Illusion God Palace would never step out of the Heaven Gate, let alone come to the world of Divine Ruins. And those who came from the world of Divine Ruins were proud to be able to enter the Illusion God Palace. They didn't want to leave. There were very few people like Chu Luiyue, who kept going in and out of the house. Her frequency was even higher than that of the Divine Envoys. Wasn't the seventh Divine Envoy in charge of guarding the Heaven Gate? Why did they let her come out again and again? More importantly, she didn't have a bloodline totem. Wasn't that even more ridiculous? Jiulong stared at her vigilantly. What are you doing here? Even if she left the Illusion God Palace, there were many places she could go. Why did she choose the god-slaying tomb? It was related to the last zither score. So Jiulong couldn't help but feel suspicious. Chu Luiyue blinked. My two subordinates are here. What's so strange about me coming here? But the two divine envoys. Why did you suddenly leave the Illusion God Palace and come here and drive everyone else away? What are you doing? Jiulong's expression was cold. That's not something you have the right to ask, Chu Luiyue said. Oh, it seems that the two divine envoys don't want to reveal. Then forget it. As she spoke, she raised her head towards Qi Han and Lu Feng behind her. Let's go. She was about to go to the tombs. Stop. Jiulong and Jiulong never thought that Chu Luiyue would actually walk in without a second word. He didn't even put them in his eyes. Chu Luiyue stopped in his tracks and turned his head to ask, What's wrong? Is there anything else? Jiulong gritted her teeth. It seems like you've turned a deaf ear to what we've said before? Chu Luiyue asked. Words? What words? Jiulong felt stifled in his chest. Qi Han explained. Master, they have already chased away all the cultivators here. If you hadn't come in time, I'm afraid we would have already. Chu Luiyue raised his eyebrows. Oh, about that. She was wondering why she hadn't seen anyone along the way. It turned out that Jiulong and Shi Yan had chased them away. In that case, it was even more obvious what they wanted to do. Chu Luiyue tilted his head and looked at Jiulong and Shi Yan. That's really unfortunate. I've come this time because I have something important to do, so I won't be able to leave for the time being. I hope the two divine envoys will forgive me. Although she said so, her expression and tone were extremely natural. There wasn't the slightest hint of apology in them. Clearly, she wasn't asking for help. She was just informing them of her choice and decision. She was going to stay here. Shi Yan frowned and said coldly, Shangguan Yu, you've done so many outrageous things in the Illusion God Palace. For Dumpling's sake, the divine envoys didn't pursue the matter. But that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. If you don't listen to our advice, don't blame us for being impolite. Chu Luiyue's lips curved into a faint smile. Forgive me for being blunt, but I don't think the divine envoys have done anything extra for me. Why do you look like you've given me a lot of things? Shi Yan felt even more annoyed. In the Illusion God Palace, the divine envoys were revered. No matter what they said or did, their subordinates would do as they were told. Very few would object, and even fewer would dare to talk back to them. But now Chu Luiyue had done all of this, and she didn't seem afraid at all. Who gave her the confidence? Shangguan Yu, are you sure you want to continue being so impudent? Jiulong raised his sword and pointed it at her. No matter how powerful your eminence is, she's still your eminence. If he used his full strength, Chu Luiyue wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. Chu Luiyue blinked and smiled in the face of the cold sword light. Divine envoys, if I'm not wrong, the two of you are also here for that last zither score, right? Since everyone has the same goal, why don't we work together and find it first? We can talk about the rest later. These words caused Jiulong and Shi Yan's expressions to change. This was something that the first divine messenger had specifically instructed the two of them. How did she know about it? Seeing the duo's reaction, Chu Luiyue also found it interesting. She glanced at the two of them, then slowly asked, You've come here to find the zither scores. The two of you have already come here to look for the zither score. Don't tell me that you still don't know. The two zither scores from before have already recognized me as their master? What did you say? Jiulong and Shi Yan both exclaimed in shock. Chu Luiyue shrugged. It seemed that they really didn't know. Since the first divine envoy gave you this task, why didn't he tell you about it? Not many people knew that she was the master of the zither scores, but Nan Jinshu was one of them. He had chosen to tell the first divine envoy the location of the last score, so there was no reason for him not to tell her. Besides, someone like the first divine envoy should know this like the back of his hand. Otherwise, how could he be qualified to be called the first divine envoy and be in charge of the entire Illusion God Palace? But the strange thing was these two didn't know? Jiulong was about to attack. Chu Luiyue calmly raised her hand Wait. Ninth Divine Envoy. I've already said that the 2 zither scores are with me. And they already belong to me. If you kill me now, you won't get a single one. Once she died, the 2 zither scores would be scattered and hidden away again. And they would never be found again. Unless there was something wrong with their heads, Jiu Long and Shi Yan would never touch her. This was also why Chu Luiyue dared to be so frank. Since she couldn't hide it, she might as well be frank. You dare threaten us? Jiu Long gritted her teeth. Chu Luiyue sighed helplessly. I've already made it so obvious, but you two only realized it now. She had always been a straightforward person. If she wanted to threaten someone, she would do it openly and openly. The first 2 zither scores were with her. If they had the ability, they would have to fight for it. She wasn't afraid of death, but she didn't know if the Illusion God Palace would be afraid of getting nothing in the end. Chapter 23-24. Jiu Long and Shi Yan never expected that Chu Luiyue would do such a thing. She directly admitted that the 2 zither scores were with her, and used them as leverage to threaten them, so that they wouldn't dare to kill her. She was so direct that she didn't even give them any time to react. The most hateful thing was that after thinking about it carefully, they realized that Chu Luiyue wasn't so arrogant for no reason. After knowing this, even though they hated her to the core, they didn't dare to do anything to her. Since you're looking for the zither scores, and I'm also looking for one, isn't it just right for us to work together? Chu Luiyue asked with a smile. Jiu Long was fuming with anger. What do you mean by just right? Shang Guanyu, do you really think we're fools? The zither scores had already recognized her as the master, so even if they found the remaining one, it would most likely end up in her hands. In this aspect, she had an absolute natural advantage. Even if they worked together and found the zither scores, it would just be a wedding dress for her. Right now, they couldn't wait to guard against her. So why would they work together with her? Chu Luiyue looked regretful and spread her hands. It seems that the 2 of you aren't willing. Since that's the case then, let's mind our own business and rely on our own abilities. How about it? This zither score belongs to whoever finds it first. Jiu Long and Shi Yan looked at each other. Of course, they didn't want to agree to Chu Luiyue's suggestion. She was the master of the zither scores, so she had an advantage over them. But if they didn't agree, looking at her posture, it seemed like she was going to continue to cause trouble. And they couldn't do anything to her. After a long while, Shi Yan gave Jiu Long a look, then looked at Chu Luiyue. Since you insist, it's not that we can't agree, but we also have a condition. Divine Envoy, please speak. Whether or not we can find the zither scores will depend on our own abilities. However, the person who brings the zither scores back to the Illusion God Palace will be the real winner. At that time, no matter what the result is, the other side can't continue to fight for it. Chu Luiyue's red lips curved slightly. I knew these 2 people wouldn't be easy to convince. So this was what they were planning. One had to know that there was a considerable distance between here and the illusory God Palace. Who could predict what would happen in the middle? Even if she found it first, they could snatch it from her halfway and forcefully take it for themselves. In this way, he would be able to achieve his goal. Chu Luiyue was a god, while Qi Han and Lu Feng, who stood behind him, were both high gods. Jiu Long and Shi Yan, on the other hand, were both at a level higher than her eminence. Wasn't this clearly bullying? Once they made a move, Chu Luiyue's side would not be able to compete with them even if they tried their best. This was clearly a robbery. However, after Chu Luiyue thought about it seriously for a while, he nodded happily and agreed. Sure. Chu Luiyue's reply was too sudden. Even Jiu Long and the other 2 were momentarily stunned. However, one thing needs to be clear. Does returning to the illusory God Palace refer to passing through the gate of heaven or something else? If you insist that it only counts after entering the illusory God Palace, then wouldn't I have lost from the start? Chu Luiyue shrugged. Naturally, it counts after passing through the gate of heaven. Shi Yan added. Although he didn't know why Chu Luiyue agreed, this condition was clearly beneficial to them. It would be a waste not to use it. It would be best if the 2 of them could directly find the last zither score. If Chu Luiyue was one step ahead of them, they could just snatch it back. As long as they didn't harm her life, Everything else was still under their control. Jiulong's mood finally calmed down. Since we've discussed it then rumble. A loud sound suddenly came from afar. Jiulong and Shi Yan immediately turned to look. This sound came from the depths of the tomb. Someone had already entered. The two looked at each other. Jiulong immediately realized something and looked at Chu Luyue angrily. You secretly brought someone here? Chu Luyue smiled, and her eyes curved into crescents. I didn't say that I came here alone. You. Jiulong was so angry that her teeth were itching. She had said so much just to stall for time. Shi Yan frowned. Forget it. Now is not the time to argue with her. Let's go in and see what's going on. This commotion came so suddenly that it was definitely not something an ordinary cultivator could do. Something must have happened in the tombs of Her Eminence. Perhaps it has something to do with the last zither score. Jiulong glared at Chu Luyue. Shang Guanyu, it's too early for you to be happy. The one who has the last laugh is the winner. Chu Luyue couldn't be bothered with the two of them. She turned to Qi Han and Lu Feng. Let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, and her slender figure quickly disappeared from the spot. She went straight into the depths of the tomb. Qi Han and Lu Feng followed closely behind her. Fortunately, the two of them weren't seriously injured. Moreover, Chu Luyue and Jiulong had been fighting for a while, so they had rested enough and quickly followed. Jiulong cursed under her breath and followed Shi Yan. Jiulong and Shi Yan's cultivation level was higher than Chu Luyue's after all. In just a few breaths' time, they had overtaken them. The two of them didn't stop and went straight in the direction of the voice. After about 15 minutes, they saw a figure in the distance. It was a young man. At this moment, his back was facing them. His clothes were whiter than snow, and he was tall and straight. He had one hand behind his back. The space in front of him was already beginning to distort and collapse, and it was constantly devouring the energy around him. Even though it was only a back view, that cold and noble aura was still not concealed in the slightest. Jiulong frowned. Is this the person who came with Shang Guanyu? Why does it look like something is wrong? He couldn't tell what was wrong, but there was an inexplicable sense of uneasiness in his heart. However, he quickly threw this feeling to the back of his mind. Who are you? How dare you team up with Shang Guanyu and deceive the two of us? Jiulong asked in a low voice. Hearing her voice, the man turned around. His handsome and devilish face seemed to be covered with a thin layer of frost. His phoenix eyes were deep and unparalleled. Jiulong, Shi Yan, you're getting bolder. Digression. I want to eat barbecue. I'm going to be a fan 600 p.m. Chapter 23-25. This question instantly caused Jiulong and Shi Yan to be shocked on the spot. Emperor. The two of them were shocked. Their previous arrogance immediately disappeared and was replaced by deep respect. Why are you here? Jiulong's face turned pale. What did he say to the emperor just now? No wonder he felt that something was wrong when he saw this figure. This aura. He actually didn't recognize it. Actually, Jiulong couldn't be blamed. After so many years, the number of times he had seen the emperor could be counted on one hand. On one hand, the emperor didn't show up most of the time. On the other hand, with his and Shi Yan's seniority, they were usually quite far away from each other. They couldn't be said to be familiar with each other. Moreover, they didn't expect that the emperor would appear here. Rongxiu looked up slightly. Three figures could be vaguely seen from afar. They were Chu Luyue and the other two. Their strength was not as strong as Jiulong and Shi Yan. In addition, Qi Han and Lu Feng were only in the high god realm and were injured, so their speed was even more limited. As a result, the distance between the two sides was so large in a short period of time. However, this made it convenient for Rongxiu. This short period of time was enough for him to solve the problem of the two. Thinking of this, Rongxiu retracted his gaze and looked at the two again. Feeling that indifferent and cold gaze on them, Jiulong and Shi Yan felt a sense of pressure, and their bodies tensed up. Didn't you already guess why I am here? He said indifferently. The two of them were stunned. After a while, they suddenly came to their senses and were shocked. Wait, what does the emperor mean? Did he really come with Chu Luyue? But Chu Liyue's background, when did he have contact with the emperor? Furthermore, it would appear that the relationship between them was not ordinary at all. Otherwise, Chu Liyue wouldn't have used such a tone when he mentioned the emperor. Shi Yan suddenly thought of something and gasped. Emperor, that Shang Guan Yu is one of your men? He was guessing that Chu Liyue was Rong Xiu's subordinate and nothing else. However, Rong Xiu was too lazy to correct him. He only raised his eyebrows slightly. His people, there was nothing wrong with that. Ben was his. His reaction, in the eyes of the other two, was obviously a tacit agreement. For a moment, the two of them did not know how to react. Why didn't Chu Liyue mention such an important matter before? If she had revealed even the slightest bit, she definitely wouldn't have received that kind of treatment in the illusory god palace. Jiulong and Shi Yan couldn't figure it out. The only thing they were clear on was that they had offended Chu Liyue earlier, and this undoubtedly meant that they had offended the Celestial Emperor as well. Celestial Emperor, we have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai, which is why we offended you. Please forgive us. Jiulong came back to his senses and quickly begged for mercy. Other than begging for mercy, he couldn't think of anything else he could do now. Previously, he had rushed over excitedly, intending to find the last zither score before Chu Liyue. Even if he couldn't find it, it wasn't bad to get rid of the person who conspired with her first. Who knew that he would bump into this person? Wasn't this courting death? Shi Yan saw the situation and immediately followed suit, his heart filled with uneasiness. Although they had only seen the Celestial Emperor a few times, they were very clear about the Celestial Emperor's temperament. It was definitely not to be provoked. The mistake that they had made today was enough for them to suffer a lot. Rong Xiu didn't say anything. The surroundings fell into a dead silence, as if even the air had frozen at this moment. The two of them held their breaths, as if their hearts were about to jump out of their throats. Finally, Rong Xiu spoke. Go to the illusory god sea and receive your punishment. Without Ai's permission, you are not allowed to leave. Hearing this, Jiulong and Shi Yan were stunned. Celestial Emperor means now? Rong Xiu's eyes moved slightly, and his thin scarlet lips raised into an extremely cold arc. If you can continue to stay here, it will be considered as your ability. The two of them trembled at the same time. This meant that if they didn't leave immediately, the Celestial Emperor would personally take action. Even if the two of them had the guts, they wouldn't dare to take such a risk. Wasn't this taking the initiative to throw themselves into a knife's mouth? But, Celestial Emperor, it's not that the two of us deliberately disobeyed your orders. But this time, we are here on the orders of the first divine envoy to find the last zither score. If we can't complete the mission, I'm afraid that when we return, we won't be able to explain it to the first divine envoy. Jiulong braced himself and spoke with difficulty. If they had any other choice, they wouldn't choose to go against the Celestial Emperor. But in this situation, they really had no choice. After all, the divine envoys were from the illusory god palace. Since the first divine envoy had ordered them, they didn't dare to disobey. Although the Celestial Emperor had a noble status, under most circumstances, he wouldn't interfere in the matters of the illusory god palace. And the zither score was also an item of the illusory god palace. Logically speaking, this matter shouldn't have much to do with the Celestial Emperor. Why would he come here personally? Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. What? Ai's orders can't even compare to the words of the first divine envoy. We don't dare. Jiulong and Shi Yan's souls almost flew out of their bodies as they hurriedly denied. Not to mention them, even the master of the illusory god palace had to respectfully greet the Celestial Emperor when he saw him. How could they dare to say that? After weighing the pros and cons, the two of them struggled for a while before finally nodding with difficulty. We obey the Celestial Emperor's orders. But the last zither score, Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes. The zither score came from the illusory god palace, so it should return in the end. Hearing this, Jiulong and Shi Yan only thought that he agreed to return the last zither score to the illusory god palace after finding it. No matter what, they would be able to answer to the first divine envoy when they returned. Then, the two of us will take our leave. After saying that, seeing that Rong Xiu's expression was normal, The two of them bowed respectfully, and then hurriedly turned and left. Their speed was even faster than when they came. They were afraid that if they were a step late, they would lose their lives here. After a while, the two figures quickly disappeared into the distance. At this moment, Chu Luyue and the other two finally arrived. Seeing that only Rong Xiu was here, Chu Luyue was stunned. Where are the two divine envoys? Chapter 23-26. Rong Xiu turned around. Who? Chu Luyue said. The 9th and 10th divine messengers. The two of them just came here. Didn't you see them? Rong Xiu shook his head. I've been here the whole time. I didn't see anyone coming. Chu Luyue frowned. How could she not see them? Although the two divine messengers had put some distance between her and 7 Chill Du Wind, she was sure that they were coming this way. She looked left and right. The surroundings were barren and desolate. There were no signs of anyone coming here. Suddenly, she focused her gaze and looked at the collapsing void not far behind Rong Xiu. This is, Rong Xiu followed her gaze and explained. The loud noise just now came from here. The last time we came here, something similar happened, but it was different. Chu Luyue nodded slightly. She had noticed this as well. The last time, she and Rong Xiu fell into a space that suddenly collapsed, and they brought the rocks back. This time, the energy and pressure here were much stronger than in the tombs of the high gods. Although the void was constantly swallowing energy, twisting and collapsing, it was not completely overturned yet. From this, one could see how powerful the power of space here was. At a glance, a transparent vortex had formed in the void. It kept spinning and expanding. The surrounding energy of heaven and earth kept surging into it, gradually turning it into a black hole. It could not be seen or touched. Only the vast pressure was getting heavier and heavier, indicating the danger within. It was still rising. A faintly discernible summoning force came from the vortex. Chu Luyue frowned slightly and walked forward. Master. Qi Han and Lu Feng called out worriedly. Chu Luyue raised her hand. Don't worry. I know what to do. With that, she continued to walk forward. At this moment, a piece of gravel the size of a palm suddenly rolled over from the side. It only stopped when it touched the tip of her foot. Chu Luyue looked down. Obviously, this stone came from one of the tombstones. And it was the tomb of the high god. She bent down and picked up the stone. Suddenly, she heard a faint buzzing sound in front of her that could not be ignored. Buzz! She looked up in surprise, only to see that the vortex not far in front of her had suddenly stopped spinning. But this situation only lasted for a moment. The next moment, everything returned to normal. It didn't seem any different from before. However, Chu Luyue's eyes widened in shock. Because there seemed to be an invisible connection between her and the vortex. This feeling was very strange. From this moment on, she could vaguely feel the changes in energy of the vortex. She was stunned for a moment, then suddenly, she looked at the stone in her hand. It was just a shattered, weathered, and ordinary-looking rock. There were traces of erosion on it. If it was on the ground, no one would take a second look at it. However, this was a tombstone that belonged to a high god. At this moment, the void to her right twisted and collapsed, then quickly formed a vortex. Another stone rolled to her feet. Chu Luyue sucked in a breath of cold air. An absurd and daring idea surfaced in her mind. It can't be, she muttered softly. Then, she bent down and picked up the second stone. Almost at the same time, the second vortex stopped spinning. Chu Luyue's hand slowly clenched. Then, the vortex spun again, and it established that invisible connection with Chu Luyue. Chu Luyue was shocked. As expected, the stones here were similar to the ones she had obtained in the high god's tombstones. But in fact, they were very different. Each of them actually controlled a space. It might be an exaggeration to say that they controlled it, but it was basically the same. The surrounding energy was constantly surging toward the two vortexes, and the two stones in Chu Luyue's hands seemed to be faintly strengthening. Although it was subtle, it could not be mistaken. Clang! Suddenly, the sound of a zither came from Chu Luyue's dantian. The sound of the zither was bleak and cold, and it spread far and wide in this vast wilderness. Chu Luyue frowned subconsciously. She did not do anything just now, So why did the sound of the zither suddenly appear? Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from the wind. The void over there is also starting to collapse. And there. Chu Luihua followed his gaze. Not far behind them, 3 more vortexes quickly appeared. The vast space seemed to be divided into countless small areas, and they all started to collapse. In just a few minutes, Chu Luihua and the others were already surrounded by several void vortexes. A few stones rolled over and stopped at Chu Luihua's feet. Her heart raced, and the blood in her body seemed to be boiling. Her guess seemed to be correct. These stones, these tombstones of her eminence, these heroic souls that had been buried for tens of thousands of years, seemed to be awakening. Her eminence was naturally different from a high god. A high god's combat strength was in the god domain, but her eminence had completely divided this world and controlled the endless power of space. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Void vortexes appeared around them one after another. More and more stones came to Chu Luihua's side, as if they were responding to her summons. Clang, clang. Chu Luihua's glabella was boiling hot. Chapter 23-27. She touched the area between her eyebrows. It was as if there was a burning flame burning there. Her heart was beating rapidly, and the blood in her body was surging. This was her totem. Chu Luihua had known about the existence of this thing for a long time, but it had only appeared a few times when she was in a life-or-death situation. Hence, she had not been able to pay much attention to it. But now this totem had suddenly appeared again. It was so clear. The surrounding energy of heaven and earth started to gather towards her quickly. Her aura also started to rise rapidly. Buzz buzz. Chu Luihua looked up. Above the heavens, the void was continuously distorting and collapsing. Vortexes were constantly appearing. Large pieces of rocks had already piled up beside her feet. An unparalleled amount of energy exploded, creating an extremely terrifying pressure that made it hard for people to breathe. Beside her, Lu Feng clutched her chest and sat down. She coughed a few times and wiped away the blood at the corner of her mouth. Then, she placed her hands on her knees and started to channel the surrounding energy into her body. Under such a powerful pressure, the best way to deal with it was to cultivate. Seeing this, Chi Han's expression became serious. He also placed his sword in front of him and started to cultivate. At this moment, endless energy was surging towards them from all directions. Most of it entered the collapsed void, which indirectly strengthened the power of the rocks beside Chu Luihua's feet. The remaining small portion dissipated and was swallowed by Lu Feng and Chi Han. Although the energy that the two of them occupied was only a small portion compared to the energy that was surging into the void, it was definitely an extremely vast amount for an exalted god. A faint blue glow overflowed from Lu Feng's body and quickly enveloped him. This was his godly territory. After the violent energy entered this godly territory, it was refined and became even purer. Without a doubt, this greatly increased Lu Feng's cultivation speed. Chi Han, who was beside her, made the same choice almost at the same time. A faint silver glow silently spread out and enveloped Chi Han's body. Rong Xiu's gaze turned slightly and paused on the two of them for a moment. His eyes were deep, yet calm and indifferent. In the next moment he looked away. In fact, if there were other cultivators present, they would definitely be shocked to see Lu Feng and Chi Han's situation. After all, the two of them were only high gods. Logically speaking, their god realms should not be able to resist the terrifying might of the venerable god around them. It was even to the extent that the deity domain could not be used under such circumstances. However, from the beginning to the end, the movements of these two people were extremely smooth and natural, as if they were not hindered in the slightest. If Chu Luihua turned around to take a look, she might have sensed that something was wrong. However, all her energy was focused on the collapsing void and the gathering stones. How could she care about anything else? One after another. As more and more stones approached her, the invisible connection between her and the void vortexes around her became closer and closer. At the same time, a sense of desolation and sorrow welled up in his heart. Chu Luihua was never a sentimental person. However, as she stood here, as time slowly passed and everything around her kept changing, Her state of mind seemed to be moving along uncontrollably. A wind blew, carrying the coarse gravel of the desolate wilderness. When it brushed past her face, it brought a slight stinging pain. The smell of blood in the air seemed to have thickened. The solemn and bleak sound of the zither rang out from her body and spread far and wide. There seemed to be an image that appeared in her mind, but it was not very clear. Chu Luiyue raised her hand almost instinctively. Her eyes focused and seemed to have sunk into nothingness. At this moment, there seemed to be countless stars in the depths of her obsidian-like eyes. Then, her slender and white fingertips gently plucked. Clang! There were no strings under her hands, so she used the countless intersecting spaces as support to play the zither. Clang clang! Shattered tombstones stood in great numbers on the wilderness. There seemed to be a zither sound in the depths that resonated with her from afar. The palace of the illusory god. Jiu Long and Shi Yin returned as fast as they could. After stepping into the illusory god palace, they did not care about anything else, and hurried to the residence of the first divine envoy. Just as they arrived outside the courtyard and stood still, the door of the courtyard opened. Seeing this scene, Jiu Long and Shi Yin looked at each other, and saw the worry and nervousness in each other's eyes. The first divine envoy obviously knew something. This made them timid, and for a moment, they did not dare to take a step forward. Come in and talk. A low and indifferent voice came from inside. The two did not dare to refuse and walked in nervously. Just like last time, they stopped when they were 5 steps away from the door. After respectfully cupping their fists, Jiu Long spoke after some deliberation. First divine envoy, this time, the two of us did not do well, and did not succeed in bringing back the zither score. Please punish us. Reason? The voice was calm and collected, without the slightest hint of surprise. This? Jiu Long wiped the sweat from her forehead. However, Shi Yin could not help but explain. First divine envoy, this time we failed to return because the emperor also went to the god-slaying tomb. Also Shanghai Yu went with him. Maybe because Shanghai Yu was the owner of the first 2 zither scores, the emperor intended to let her do it. Although we don't know why the emperor suddenly intervened, we did not dare to disobey the emperor's order, so we came back. However, the emperor promised to send the zither score to the illusory god palace after this matter is over. Jiu Long gritted her teeth and added, in addition, the 2 of us have been ordered to the illusory god sea to receive punishment because we offended the emperor unintentionally. Without the emperor's order, we are not allowed to go out. In other words, after explaining to the first divine envoy, the 2 of them had to go to the illusory god sea. After the 2 of them finished speaking, the room was silent for a long time. This strange silence caused the 2 of them to be somewhat at a loss. Just now they did not say anything wrong, did they? No matter what, they had explained the matter clearly. If one thought about it, one would understand that this matter was not their fault. Not to mention them, even the first divine envoy did not dare to disobey the emperor's order. Moreover, the emperor had already punished them. What else could be considered enough? Jiu Long and Shi Yin waited for a long time. First divine envoy. Finally they got a response. I already know about this matter. You can leave now. You should receive your punishment, but this matter cannot be spread. The 2 of them were stunned. You mean, the emperor went to the god-slaying tomb? The voice paused. Everything and everyone related to the zither score must be kept secret. Chapter 23-28. This was the highest secret of the illusion god palace, so it was normal for the first divine envoy to ask them to keep it a secret. Without any hesitation, the 2 of them immediately agreed. Yes, if the other divine envoys ask, just say that you didn't manage to find the score and offended the emperor, so you were sent to the illusion god ocean. There's no need to mention anything else. Jiu Long paused. He could guess what the first divine envoy meant, but he wasn't sure. After a moment of hesitation, he finally asked. First divine envoy then. Shangguan Yu is the emperor's woman. Don't you understand the emperor's attitude? The first divine envoy interrupted him with a cold and indifferent voice. Jiu Long was shocked and hurriedly said, Yes, Jiu Long understands. Shi Yin understands. That woman had been in the illusion god palace for so long, but she hadn't revealed anything. The emperor's intentions were clear. The only thing that wasn't right was probably the extra attention and care that Zhenbao Pavilion had given her. But that matter didn't arouse too many people's suspicions. After all, Chu Luyue was a mystic master and had great talent and strength. Even if she didn't have any background, it was normal for Precious Treasure Pavilion to be willing to support her. Jiu Long and Shi Yan had heard about this before, but they didn't take it to heart. But now that they thought about it, they realized that there was a reason for everything. It was just that if this reason were to be revealed, who knew how many jaws would drop from shock? The two even secretly rejoiced that they hadn't interacted much with Chu Luyue. Other than the dispute over the score in the god-slaying tomb, they hadn't offended her much. Judging from the emperor's attitude, it was clear that he valued her greatly. It wouldn't be good to provoke her. You may leave. Hearing this, the two heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly left. After they left, the gate of the courtyard was tightly shut. In the courtyard, little Hachi was lazily resting on a chair, holding a scarlet pill in her hand. She narrowed her eyes and looked at it through the light. Jian Fengqi sat next to her with his hands on his knees. A rare hint of nervousness appeared in his charming peach blossom eyes. Did you refine this yesterday? Little Hachi asked. Jian Fengqi nodded. A total of 6 pills. They're all here. There was a jade bottle beside little Hachi. The one in her hand was the first one she had poured out. The veins on it were clear, and the medicinal fragrance was rich. This was a top-notch Grand Physician level pill. Then, with a light pinch of her fingernails, the pill instantly turned into ashes. Little Hachi. Jian Fengqi's eyes widened instantly. Why did you destroy my pill? Little Hachi blinked. Didn't you ask me to help you refine the pills? This is my answer. There is no need to keep this pill. Go back and continue to work hard. Jian Fengqi's eyes twitched. It took an entire day. You managed to refine a pill of this standard in just one day? As a Grand Physician, aren't you a little too weak? Little Hachi's words successfully blocked Jian Fengqi's remaining words. Then, little Hachi picked up the jade bottle beside her. With a squeeze of her palm, the jade bottle, along with the pills inside, was instantly turned into ashes. Jian Fengqi suddenly stood up, his handsome features distorted for a moment. With just these, you'll never be able to break through to Grand Physician level in this lifetime. Little Hachi clapped her hands, took out a snow-white handkerchief, and carefully wiped her hands clean. Jian Fengqi clutched his chest and took a step back. He pointed a trembling finger at little Hachi, but he couldn't say anything. He was angry. He thought that he had suffered enough during this period of time, but he underestimated little Hachi's fighting ability. Last time, he stole a medical book from little Hachi. Although he didn't say it out loud, he was still very grateful to little Hachi. So after he finished refining this time, he specially came to ask little Hachi for help. But what awaited him was an absolutely merciless attack from all sides. Jian Fengqi regretted it for a moment. When he first got the medical book, why did he think that little Hachi was a good person? He was really blind, really blind. Little 8 was finally satisfied when he saw him being angered to this extent. Actually, she wasn't so sharp-tongued in the first place, and she wasn't deliberately targeting Jian Fengqi. It was just that she had suffered too much from Big Brother recently, and needed to find someone to calm down. Seeing Jian Fengqi suffer, little Hachi immediately felt much better. That's right. She was still very outstanding. In fact, Big Brother was still the pervert. Yes, that was it. Thinking of this, little Hachi narrowed her beautiful eyes and said with a smile, seeing that you've worked hard to refine these pills, I'll say one more thing. There are 2 medicinal herbs in here. You've used the wrong ones. Of course I know what's wrong with these pills. Jian Fengqi snorted. Little Hachi was stunned and sat up. Really? Jian Fengqi pursed his lips. Isn't it just raging winter grass and riverwood? Originally, we should use wind thousand seeds and devil's snare to replace them. Little Hachi raised her eyebrows and looked him up and down. Oh, I couldn't tell. You really know? Jian Fengqi didn't say anything. He was still distressed over the bottle of pills that little Hachi had just crushed. However, little 8 didn't mind and asked again. Since you know, why don't you change it? If these 2 medicinal herbs are used well, The level of this pill can be raised from senior doctor to senior doctor. Jian Fengqi did have some skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to compete with Chu Luyue for so many years, and still be just a hair's breadth away. This in itself was enough to show that he actually had extraordinary talent. Many times, a tyrannical opponent could often stimulate a person's potential to the greatest extent. Jian Fengqi was like this. Although he had been defeated repeatedly over the years, he had unknowingly left countless people far behind. Hearing little Hachi's question, Jian Fengqi sighed. You think I don't want to do this? But Herb Mountain doesn't have those 2 medicinal herbs. How is that possible? Little Hachi's face was full of astonishment. Although these 2 medicinal herbs were precious, they couldn't be considered top-grade rare items. Moreover, what didn't Herb Mountain have? I've asked. They did have them before, but the last batch was harvested decades ago. Although there are new ones, they're not old enough. These 2 medicinal herbs required at least 100 years of age. He had no choice but to give up. Little Hachi blinked and then stood up. Impossible. Herb Mountain has always been guarded by the 8th Oracle. How could she make such a low-level mistake? No matter what kind of heavenly treasure, when harvesting it, must not be completely seized. Instead, the foundation must be left behind. Little Hachi's heart suddenly burned with a ball of fire. Is she crazy? Chapter 23-29. The corner of Jian Fengqi's eyes twitched as he held his forehead helplessly. This person's temper was still as bad as before. In the entire illusory god palace, there were probably only a few people who dared to scold a divine envoy like this. He waved his hand and motioned for little Hachi to sit down and restrain herself. Little Hachi, lower your voice. Are you afraid that others can't hear you? Although this was their own courtyard, it couldn't stop the walls from having ears. If someone heard it and reported it to the 8th divine envoy, then little Hachi's brows furrowed. Did I say something wrong? Herb Mountain is such a large territory, and there are many kinds of herbs. How could someone have picked them all? And more than one kind? She's a divine envoy, isn't she too ridiculous? Xu Jing had always considered himself as the manager of Herb Mountain, and now it turned out like this? Seeing her huge reaction, Jian Fengqi's heart instantly felt touched. Little Hachi, I didn't expect you to be so concerned about my alchemy. Little Hachi glanced at him. Brother, don't misunderstand. I'm just worried about those herbs. Jian Fengqi, pretend I didn't say anything. Little Hachi crossed her arms and paced back and forth in the courtyard in annoyance. She really couldn't figure out what Xu Jing was doing. The key was that in the past few years, she had imposed various restrictions on entering and leaving Herb Mountain. With just this, how could things turn out like this? Little Hachi struggled for a while, and finally couldn't help but walk out. Jian Fengqi hurriedly asked, Hey, where are you going? Little Hachi was angry. To Herb Mountain. I want to see if she deliberately hid the herbs, or if she really let someone use them all. Jian Fengqi was stunned. Strange, when did little Hachi become so angry? He wasn't angry himself, so why was she so angry? Seeing that little Hachi was really going out, he hurriedly stood up to stop her. Little Hachi, I think we should just forget about it. Is she the 8th Oracle? If he really let her go there so excitedly, she would definitely cause trouble. Little Hachi raised her eyebrows. What? You don't dare to go? Jian Fengqi was speechless. Was this a question of whether he dared or not? At this moment, Xi Jing also walked out of the house and headed outside. Seeing the 2 of them standing at the door, he greeted them. Yo, little Hachi, are you going to Herb Mountain again? Little Hachi nodded. That's right. How did 4th brother know? Yoshie suddenly paused and staggered. He quickly supported himself on the door and coughed. Ahem, I heard you guys talking about this just now. Does 4th brother also support me going? Little Hachi pouted and asked pitifully. 4th brother, you have no idea what Xu Jing has done to Herb Mountain. Shijingo glared at him, and immediately patted his chest. Go. In this illusion god palace, where can't little Hachi go? At the same time, some of them glanced at Jian Fengqi with hostility. Jian Fengqi was silent for a moment. Little Hachi, I'm a little regretful. Can I go back now? Little Hachi walked forward without looking back. What are you afraid of? Let them look. It's not like you'll lose a piece of meat. Jian Fengqi. You won't, but I might. It wasn't that he hadn't been looked at by so many people at the same time, but they were usually women. It was the first time that so many men were staring at him at the same time. Young Master Jian was really panicking. Little Hachi laughed. I see that many girls are looking at you too. Jian Fengqi's looks were top-notch, and he was suave and elegant. It was normal for girls to like him. Swish! Jian Fengqi pushed open his fan and covered half of his face as he softly said, I'm sorry. Sure, don't talk nonsense. It's not good if others hear you. Little Hachi understood. I'm afraid that little Hung Yu will hear me. But she's been cultivating in seclusion in her room recently. Jian Fengqi's eyebrows twitched. How do you know that she won't suddenly appear here? This was what she was best at, all right. He was busy defending himself, and didn't deny the first half of the sentence. Little Hachi pursed her lips and smiled meaningfully. Forget it. Let's go see if there are any more of those two herbs. After saying that, she ran in a certain direction. Jian Fengqi said, Wait, it's not there. He had been here before, and was clearly in the opposite direction. Little Hachi blinked. It's here. Digression 13 U guards. Gradually recovering lost territory 6:00 p.m. Chapter 2330. Jian Fengqi pointed in another direction. Wind thousand seeds and devil's snare are usually associated with each other. They grow in damp and cold places. I've been to this herb mountain a few times. I'm sure I'm not mistaken. Little Hachi said. I didn't say you were mistaken. But didn't you say that there's none over there? Let's go somewhere else. Who knows? Jian Fengqi said helplessly. I've already asked around the entire herb mountain. There's only one place that has it. It's over there. It's not found anywhere else. Little Hachi suddenly became stubborn. But how will we know if we don't go? Jian Fengqi couldn't argue with her, so he had to say, All right then. Let's go over there and take a look. Little Hachi nodded, and headed in a certain direction without hesitation. Jian Fengqi frowned slightly. Looking at Little Hachi's back, a strange feeling welled up in his heart. Why did he feel that Little Hachi didn't just pick a random direction? Instead, she had already made up her mind to go there? This thought flashed through Jian Fengqi's mind, but he quickly suppressed it. He moved his feet and followed her. The herb mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. The area was vast, and the mountain range was continuous. There were all kinds of heavenly materials and earthly treasures. It was easy to get lost in this place if one wasn't careful. But Little Hachi seemed to be very familiar with this place. She turned left and right without stopping. After walking for a while, Jian Fengqi finally couldn't help but ask, Little Hachi, how many times have you been here before? Why are you so familiar with this place? Little Hachi thought for a moment and said, Not many times. But the terrain here is simple. I can remember it with a glance. What's so strange about it? Jian Fengqi. Looking at Little Hachi's relaxed expression for a moment, he doubted his brain. Was it not enough? That couldn't be right. He was a celestial physician. With so many complicated prescriptions, he could basically memorize them after reading them a few times. His memory could definitely be considered top-notch. However, after coming to Herb Mountain several times, he often felt a little confused. What was going on with Little Hachi? After thinking for a while, Jian Fengqi felt that there was only one possibility. Little Hachi's talent was indeed a little better than his. No matter what, she was now a supreme doctor. It was not surprising that she was better than him in this aspect. Thinking of this, Jian Fengqi felt much better. We're here. It was right in front. Little Hachi suddenly said. Jian Fengqi followed her line of sight, and saw that behind a steep and tall mountain, there was actually a rather short and ordinary hill. The mountain was verdant and lush, and there were many medicinal herbs growing there. However, when Jian Fengqi took a closer look, he did not see Feng Qianzi and Mandala. This place doesn't have it, right? He said with some uncertainty. Little Hachi did not say anything. In a flash, she arrived at the foot of the hill. A small stream flowed by. The water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. On both sides of the stream, There were clusters of lush green bellflowers that were half the height of a person. Little Hachi's body was light, as she jumped over a few stones in the stream. After arriving at the other side, she stretched out her hand and brushed aside a cluster of bellflowers. Look, isn't this it? Hearing this, Jian Fengqi was stunned and hurried over. He went over to take a look. Indeed, there were clusters of feng qianzi growing under the bellflowers. These feng qianzi had no leaves. On the rhizome, there were round and round seeds in a picturesque disorder. When the wind blew, this heavy cluster of seeds swayed with the wind. A few of the seeds were blown off and scattered in the stream, flowing downstream. Because these feng qianzi were a light green, they were hidden very well among the bellflowers. Therefore, Jian Fengqi did not see them at first. At the rhizome of the feng qianzi, there were thin purple vines wrapped around it. It was mandala. They really do have them. Jian Fengqi was really shocked. More importantly, these feng qianzi and mandala seemed to be at least 500 years old. However, he had asked many people before, and they all said that Herb Mountain did not have any more feng qianzi and mandala of this age. What are you waiting for? Little Hachi raised her chin, indicating that he could take the things away. Jian Fengqi came back to his senses and took a few clusters. Looking at the herbs in his hand, Jian Fengqi could not help but look at Little Hachi again with a strange expression. Little Hachi, this place is so secluded. How did you know? Little Eight opened his mouth, but the words were stuck in his throat and he changed his mind. I already knew. Her words were a little ambiguous, but Jian Fengqi did not hear it. He just thought that she had been here before. After all, with her temperament, she was really capable of doing such a thing. However, this place is so deserted. Jian Fengqi did not delve into it and looked around. There was no one else here except for the two of them. Since Herb Mountain was fully open, people could go in and out freely and basically go anywhere. Basically, people would set foot in every corner of Herb Mountain. However, this place was deserted, as if no one had ever been here. Little Hachi shrugged. Who cares? Anyway, we found the things, just take them. How dare you? A voice full of anger suddenly came from behind the two of them. Jian Fengqi immediately looked back and saw Xu Jing standing not far away, looking down at the two of them. Her carefully drawn eyebrows were tightly knitted, and there was undisguised anger in her eyes. Jian Fengqi elbowed Little Hachi. Hey, the person you're looking for is here. Of course, Little Hachi had already recognized Xu Jing's voice. Her red lips curled into a perfect arc, and she slowly turned around. Eighth Oracle, what a coincidence. Her voice was still soft and delicate. Those who did not know better would think that she was greeting a good friend that she had not seen in a long time. However, this voice was particularly harsh to Xu Jing's ears. Her face was cold. You are really getting bolder and bolder. How dare you trespass here? Do you know where this is? Little Hachi said honestly. I know. Isn't this Herb Mountain? Wasn't it just opened not long ago? Why are we not allowed to come here now? Xu Jing was so angry that her whole body was trembling slightly. This is the private land of the Oracle. How can you step in as you please? Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi immediately understood. So this is your residence? I'm sorry, we really didn't know. Xu Jing was in charge of the affairs of Herb Mountain. She usually spent most of her time here. Even the other oracles did not set foot in this place. However, she never expected that these two people would come here, just because she went back to the palace of the illusory god, and came back a little late. You want to shirk responsibility just because you said you didn't know? Xu Jing was so angry that she laughed. Little Hachi spread her hands. Eighth Oracle. You said that this is your territory, but you didn't even leave a sign. Who would know? Xu Jing coldly reprimanded. Why not? The barrier outside. Chapter 2331. Her voice stopped abruptly. She suddenly thought of something, and a look of shock flashed across her eyes. Number 8 turned around to take a look. Barrier? What barrier? There was nothing when we came. As she spoke, she looked at Jian Fengqi. Don't you think so? Jian Fengqi nodded. That's right. We didn't see any barrier. If there was, they wouldn't have come here so casually. Xu Jing looked up in disbelief. The barrier in the distance had indeed dissipated at some point. Xu Jing's heart sank. How could this be? That barrier had existed for tens of thousands of years, and such a situation had never happened before. Little Hachi's eyes flashed as she smiled. Eighth Oracle. How long has it been since you came to Herb Mountain? How could you not know that your barrier has disappeared? Xu Jing pursed her lips tightly and didn't say anything. Then she said, in that case, I'll let you off this time. There won't be a next time. After saying that, she turned around and was about to leave. She seemed to be in a hurry, as if she was in a hurry to do something. Little Hachi suddenly stepped forward and chuckled. Eighth Oracle, wait. Xu Jing turned around impatiently. What else do you have to say? If she wasn't in a hurry to confirm something, she wouldn't have let these two off so easily. Little Hachi said, it's not a big deal. Actually, it's not a big deal. I just have a few words that I want to talk to you about. Xu Jing frowned. What kind of medicine was this little eight selling in his gourd? I don't have time to listen to your useless words. Xu Jing retracted her gaze and was about to leave. However, Little Hachi's words made her stop in her tracks. Eighth Oracle. I heard that you have been in charge of Herb Mountain for tens of thousands of years. Logically speaking, you should know every blade of grass, every tree, every mountain, and every river here the best. However, Eighth Oracle, you don't seem to be doing a very good job. These words completely ignited the long-suppressed anger in Xu Jing's heart. She abruptly turned around and questioned sternly, what did you say? The Herb Mountain was what she cared about the most. In the past few years, she had been trying to seize more rights, wanting to completely take Herb Mountain as her own, and so on. It was not difficult to see this point. Therefore, she would never allow anyone to question her in this aspect. Previously, it was the God Monarch who had made a move. She was wary of him, so she obediently handed over all her authority. No matter how unwilling she was, she would never dare to go against that person. However, Little Hachi was different. Who do you think you are? How dare you talk nonsense in front of me? Xu Jing was so angry that he didn't show any mercy with his words. Little Hachi was not annoyed. She raised her eyebrows and said, if the eighth divine emissary had cared about Herb Mountain in the slightest, then Herb Mountain wouldn't have ended up like this. Don't tell me you don't know that. Wind seeds and devil's snare that are more than 100 years old are all gone? Of course Xu Jing knew. After all, she had kept a close watch on every single herb on Herb Mountain. However, she didn't care. So what? Then what? About? Little Hachi repeated her words. The smile on her lips deepened, but a layer of frost gradually gathered in her eyes. She sneered. Heavenly treasures are extremely precious, but it is precisely because of this that they have to be taken care of carefully. In the end, you harvested all of them and didn't leave anything behind? Eighth Oracle, even I understand this simple logic. How can you not understand it? The only explanation was that Xu Jing didn't think about taking good care of Herb Mountain at all. She just wanted to seize as many benefits as possible. Anyway, she definitely didn't lack herbs in her hands. As for the rest, she couldn't be bothered to care. Xu Jing was so angry that she laughed. She took a step forward and looked at Little Hachi with contempt and ridicule. Since Herb Mountain is guarded by me, then it's not up to others to worry about these things. Whether Herb Mountain is good or bad, what does it have to do with you? Little Hachi's expression gradually turned cold. I know that you've recently broken through to Supreme Doctor, and that it's time to show off. However, this illusory god palace doesn't lack a Supreme Doctor like you. Besides, you don't have a bloodline totem. Seeing the change in Little Hachi's expression, Xu Jing was very pleased. During this period of time, she really had enough of all kinds of anger. She had long suppressed a stomach full of anger. Now that Little Hachi had bumped into the muzzle of the gun, she naturally wouldn't let it go so easily. You and your arrogant and despotic master are just as annoying as you. You're just born lowly. Slap. Before Xu Jing could finish her words, her face was fiercely slapped. The loud and clear sound of the slap rang out, instantly freezing the surrounding space. Little Hachi had used all her strength in this slap, directly slapping Xu Jing's face to the side. It wasn't that she was weaker than Little Hachi, but She really didn't expect little Hachi to suddenly make a move. Ever since Xu Jing became a god's messenger, she had always been high and mighty. When had she ever been slapped in the face like this? She covered the numb and painful half of her face and looked at little Hachi in shock and anger. You! Without thinking, she raised her hand to counterattack, slapping towards little Hachi's face. Little Adi clamped her wrist in a death grip. That pair of beautiful eyes, which had always been enchanting and seductive, was now filled with a biting cold. You dare to scold, master. I think you don't want to live anymore. Jian Fengqi, who was watching from the side, was also stunned for a while. My great aunt, you're really fighting with a god's messenger? Just as he was about to persuade her, he suddenly felt that something was wrong with the surroundings. He lowered his head to take a look. Ripples suddenly appeared on the surface of the stream. The surrounding grass and trees swayed without wind. An indistinct and powerful aura was gradually revealed. Chapter 2332. Shock flashed across Jian Fengqi's eyes. This pressure seemed to be coming from little Hachi? But wasn't she the exalted god? How could she cause such a big commotion? However, Xu Jing was still angry and did not realize that something was wrong. She clamped down on little Eight's wrist and raised her hand to hit him again. Chi! The sound of something breaking through the air suddenly came, and a folding fan hit her wrist hard. Xu Jing felt the pain and subconsciously let go of her hand. She looked at Jian Fengqi angrily. You! Jian Fengqi hurriedly said. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wanted to stop little Hachi, but I didn't expect to hit you. Eighth Oracle, are you okay? Xu Jing was furious. Jian Fengqi was clearly helping little Hachi. Good, good. You two are really going to rebel. Little Hachi stared at Xu Jing. Her red lips curled into an enchanting smile, but her eyes were extremely cold. Oh, who did you say was going to rebel? Her voice was as soft and sweet as ever, but her tone now carried an indescribable majesty. Xu Jing's heart trembled as she subconsciously exchanged glances with little Eight. She did not know why, but when she met those cold and smiling eyes, she suddenly felt a strong sense of uneasiness. Those eyes seemed to be able to see through everything, straight to the deepest part of her heart. The bellflower swayed, the stream flowed faster, and the waves surged. Little Hachi said, Xu Jing, this herb mountain, you are not qualified to be in charge. Xu Jing was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She screamed. If I'm not qualified, do you think you are? Little Hachi did not say anything and just stared at her. The letter hanging from her waist began to tremble slightly. The words on it were rich and bright, as if they were about to burst out of it. It seems that if I don't teach you a lesson today, you won't realize what you've done wrong. As soon as she finished speaking, Xu Jing's aura suddenly surged. However, little Hachi's face did not show any signs of panic. Instead, the corners of her lips curled into a mocking smile. Jian Fengqi glanced at her, and the corner of her eyes twitched. How could little Hachi still smile at a time like this? She was really not afraid of offending Xu Jing. Jian Fengqi's figure moved, and he came to Xiao Ba's side. He pulled her behind him and said softly, he whispered, Little Hachi, you're too bold. With this slap, how would Xu Jing take revenge on her? How would she continue living in the future? Little Eight, on the other hand, brushed his hair behind his back and smiled enchantingly. What's there to be afraid of? I'd like to see how she's going to teach me a lesson. Jian Fengqi was about to say something when he suddenly saw a barrier slowly appear not far away. The barrier was pale green and had some strange patterns engraved on it. After taking a closer look, Jian Fengqi realized that it was a Xian formation. However, this Xian formation was filled with countless patterns and lines. It was extremely complicated. If one looked at it for a long time, it would give them a headache. Jian Fengqi retracted his gaze. He was still a little shocked. Is that the barrier that the 8th divine envoy mentioned before? Little Eight turned around to take a look as a smile appeared in his eyes. Jian Fengqi did not see her current expression. He was worried, but he still looked at Xu Jing. If it was a divine envoy, the two of them would definitely not be able to defeat him. They had to think of a way. However, at this moment, the power surging from Xu Jing's body suddenly dissipated into the surroundings. The power that he had just gathered dissipated silently just like that. Xu Jing was shocked. He widened his eyes in disbelief and looked at his hands. The pressure that he had accumulated in his palms was also annihilated at this moment. She panicked for a moment. Then she tried to mobilize the power around her body again. However, before she could do anything, the power dissipated again. Xu Jing's heart sank. Then, she suddenly thought of something and raised her head to look ahead. The barrier had reappeared at some point. The power that had dissipated from her body was also quietly surging toward the barrier. It was the barrier that was forcibly depriving her of power. Xu Jing felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head. An indescribable chill suddenly surged from the bottom of her heart, causing her whole body to tremble slightly. This barrier. Jian Fengqi saw that her expression was not right. He also looked back and was shocked on the spot. Wasn't this the 8th divine envoy's barrier? Why did he suddenly turn around and attack her? Xu Jing suddenly turned around and left quickly. Her speed was very fast. Her footsteps were hurried, and there was a trace of panic and embarrassment in her back. Jian Fengqi blinked. She's leaving just like that. Didn't she say that she was going to teach them a lesson? And little Hachi's slap, was she going to take it for nothing? This 8th divine envoy is really interesting, Jian Fengqi said. He looked at little Hachi and asked with some concern. Although she's gone with her personality, she definitely won't let today's matter go. Little Hachi smiled. What are you afraid of? She's like a clay Buddha crossing a river now. She can't even protect herself. How can she have the time to care about us? What do you mean? Look at that barrier. She's in charge of looking after the herb mountain, but she can't even control this. Little Hachi sneered. I thought she was very powerful. It turns out that she's just strong on the outside but weak on the inside. What a waste of my feelings. Jian Fengqi. Little Hachi. Don't you think you're getting more and more arrogant? How many people dared to scold the 8th divine envoy like this? Yes, she didn't just scold her, she even slapped her. Jian Fengqi felt that Xu Jing had probably never been bullied like this before. Just look at her expression just now. It was as if she couldn't wait to tear little Hachi apart. Little Hachi blinked her beautiful eyes. Her thick and curly eyelashes trembled slightly like small fans. She looked around and said modestly, I didn't. Jian Fengqi trembled all over. He cupped his fist and took a step back. My dear lady, let's talk things over. His little heart was still trembling when he thought of little Hachi's slap just now. Little Hachi snorted softly and walked back while twisting her waist. Jian Fengqi thought for a while and followed her. He asked with some concern, by the way, I'm afraid that Xu Jing will really hold a grudge against us this time. Little Hachi yawned carelessly. She's always been like this. What's there to worry about? What if she comes back again? Little Hachi waved her hand. Then I'll be merciful and give her another slap. 2 slaps will do. Any more and it would hurt my hand. Little Hachi looked at her hand with heartache. Look at how thick-skinned she is. My fingernails were almost scratched. Jian Fengqi. As the two talked, they arrived in front of the barrier. Jian Fengqi suddenly thought of something. He looked back and saw that the surrounding vegetation gradually stopped swaying. The waves in the stream also gradually calmed down. Chapter 2333. Just like that, everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. He frowned and glanced at little Hachi subconsciously. He wanted to ask something, but he didn't know where to start. What should he ask? Should he ask if the commotion just now had anything to do with little Hachi? And the sudden appearance of this barrier? Jian Fengqi shook his head and dispelled that ridiculous thought. Xu Jing had said that this barrier had been here for a long time. How could it have anything to do with little Hachi? At this moment, little Hachi had already arrived in front of the barrier. When he was still 10 steps away from the barrier suddenly dissipated. Little Hachi waved at Jian Fengqi. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Jian Fengqi was stunned for a moment, but then he followed her. It was probably a coincidence. After all, when they arrived, the barrier had also mysteriously disappeared. Little Hachi, why do you think that barrier is not controlled by the 8th oracle? Isn't this her territory? Little Hachi smiled. How would I know? Xu Jing hurried back to the palace of the illusory god. She wanted to look for the first oracle, but halfway there, she remembered that she had asked for an audience several times before, and without exception, she had been rejected. If she went again this time, the result would probably be the same. Xu Jing gritted her teeth, turned around, and walked toward the residence of the second oracle. Just as she arrived at the door, before she could knock, she bumped into Yu Qian, who was walking from the other side. It seemed that he had just returned. Second oracle. Seeing Yu Qian, Xu Jing hurried forward. I have something important to report. Yu Qian was in a gloomy mood. He didn't want to pay attention to her. But when he heard her, he looked up at her and saw that her expression was not right. So he stopped. What's wrong? Just as Xu Jing was about to speak, her gaze suddenly froze as she saw a bloody wound on Yu Qian's hand. It looked like he had been bitten by something. Second oracle, the wound on your hand. Yu Qian's face darkened. I was bitten by a beast on the Divine Beast Mountain. Xu Jing was shocked. What? On the Divine Beast Mountain, there were hundreds of divine beasts. They were all taken care of by the second divine envoy. Normally, these divine beasts were especially respectful towards him. Why did they suddenly go crazy this time? Yu Qian gritted his teeth. In fact, he hadn't been there for a long time. Today, he suddenly thought of this matter and wanted to go and take a look. Who would have thought that one of them would suddenly attack and bite him? Even though he had already killed it on the spot, the wound was still left behind. Furthermore, because the bastard's teeth were poisonous, he had even specially used medicine. Therefore, when he saw Xu Jing at this moment, his mood was at its worst. These bastards are getting more and more impudent. How dare they bite you? Xu Jing's words made Yu Qian even more irritated. He asked coldly, Okay, it's already over. There's no need to mention it again. But you said that you have something to report. What happened? A trace of difficulty flashed across Xu Jing's face. She then said, Don't worry. There seems to be something wrong with the barrier on the Herb Mountain. Then, she told Yu Qian what had happened. However, she deliberately skipped the part where little Hachi had attacked. It wasn't that she wanted to cover up for little Hachi, but as a divine envoy, she had been slapped by someone who had just arrived at the illusory god palace and didn't even have a bloodline totem. This matter was too embarrassing in itself. If this matter were to spread, she would really lose her face. Anyway, she had plenty of ways to get back at him. After speaking, Yu Qian didn't speak for a long time. Xu Jing was a little nervous. Second divine envoy, what happened to your face? Yu Qian suddenly asked. Xu Jing was startled. Then, she suddenly realized something. There was still a palm print on her face. She had actually forgotten about this matter. Just now, she had rushed over in a hurry. Her mind was only thinking about the barrier. How could she remember this? In the end, Yu Qian saw it. Xu Jing lowered her head in embarrassment. Yu Qian asked, Was this slapped by little Hachi? Xu Jing braced herself and nodded. Yu Qian suddenly laughed. Xu Jing, you are the 8th divine envoy. How could you be slapped like this? What are you doing? Seeing that Yu Qian was angry, Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. It's because she attacked too suddenly. I didn't check in. Yu Qian looked at her coldly. Xu Jing's remaining words were suddenly stuck in her throat. Her face was green and white. After a long time, she finally said, Xu Jing is incompetent. You are indeed incompetent. Yu Qian didn't give Xu Jing any face. You are the divine envoy. How could you be slapped by such a person? If this news gets out, the entire palace of the illusory god will be humiliated because of you. Xu Jing lowered her head and didn't dare to speak. How did you deal with that little Hachi? She paused and lowered her head even more. Not yet. At that time, the barrier suddenly. So you were slapped, but you didn't do anything in the end. You just came back like this. Yu Qian's eyes were opened. This was simply throwing the face of the divine envoy to the ground and letting others trample on it at will. Sensing his anger, Xu Jing clenched her fists, but didn't dare to say anything. At this moment, it was useless to say anything. She couldn't pretend that what had happened didn't happen. Even if she went back and killed that little Hachi now, she had already suffered this slap. This humiliation was something that would never be erased. Yu Qian took a deep breath. But that's not the most important thing. Xu Jing, after so long, you still haven't taken down that barrier? Xu Jing's face turned pale, and her legs went weak. In the past, you tried to control Herb Mountain, and did a lot of dirty tricks in private. I didn't care much about it. Because in my opinion, it's not a bad thing for you to be ambitious. At the very least, it can help you solve the problem of the barrier more quickly and smoothly. But now, you use public power for private purposes. Not only did you alarm the emperor, but you didn't make any progress on the problem of the barrier at all. Xu Jing, you disappoint me too much. Xu Jing almost couldn't bear the series of accusations and reprimands. After a while, she finally managed to find her voice. Second Divine Envoy, that barrier, I tried my best, but it's not like you don't know how difficult it is to deal with. Yu Qian looked down at her with indifferent eyes. Of course I know that, but I've given you more than 10,000 years, and you still haven't solved it. This is no longer something that can be summarized with the word incompetent. Xu Jing's nails dug deep into her palms, and she felt a sharp pain. However, she was almost numb at this time and couldn't care less about this. That barrier wasn't set up by me in the first place. It's so difficult to control it. Chapter 2334. On the other side, Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi returned to their residence. As soon as they entered the courtyard, they saw a familiar figure. It was Yanqing. Seeing Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi come in together, Yanqing stopped and took the initiative to speak for the first time. You went to the Herb Mountain? Little Hachi walked over with a smile. Brother Yanqing, how did you know? Yanqing paused and pursed his lips. Little Hachi saw his reaction and was very happy. This person really couldn't stand a little teasing, but it happened that this kind of person was the most interesting to tease. Little Hachi stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder. Brother Yanqing, you seem to be very concerned about me? Yanqing looked down and glanced at her hand. He saw that half of the gorgeous nail polish on one of her fingers had fallen off. He narrowed his eyes. Did you fight with someone? Little Hachi was surprised. How did you know? Following Yanqing's gaze, she realized and couldn't help but click her tongue. Your eyes are really sharp. Alas, it's nothing. There was a woman who was annoying, so I gave her a slap. His words were really casual and carefree. Jian Fengqi said faintly. She slapped the 8th oracle Xu Jing. Little Hachi pursed her red lips. Who told her to scold master first? Giving her a slap is already a light punishment. Listening to the conversation between the two, Yanqing quickly understood what happened. Then he frowned slightly. She didn't fight back and let you go just like that? Little Hachi laughed. She can't even take care of herself. How can she have time to care about me? With that, she turned and walked towards her room. I'm tired today, so I'll rest first. Don't disturb me. Before she finished speaking, she had already entered the room. Yanqing's eyes moved slightly. After a while, he looked away and was about to leave. Hey, Lord Yanqing. Jian Fengqi shouted. Yanqing looked back at him with cold eyes. What's the matter? Jian Fengqi's eyelids twitched. What? Little Hachi slapped the 8th oracle. Even if you're an iceberg, please give some reaction. Why doesn't everyone seem to care about this matter? He couldn't help coughing and reminded him. Little 8 really slapped the 8th divine emissary in the face. I heard it. Yanqing was a man of few words, and there was no change in his expression. Jian Fengqi choked and pounded his chest twice. Forget it. He couldn't afford to offend them. They're all really Hachis. Since everyone didn't care, why was he worries hyenas at this moment? A voice suddenly came from another room. Dong! It sounded like something had fallen over. Jian Fengqi looked over and saw that it was Mu Hongyu's room. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and knocked on the door. Hongyu, what's wrong? In the room, Mu Hongyu grimaced in pain as she stood up from the floor. Then she held the chair up. I'm fine. Hearing that her voice was full of energy, Jian Fengqi was relieved. He wanted to go in and take a look, but he gave up in the end. He knew that Mu Hongyu had been cultivating recently, trying to break through to the Mahayana realm as soon as possible. She would encounter some troubles and problems. It was a simple matter. After thinking about it, Jian Fengqi gave a few more words of advice before turning to leave. When he looked back, Yan Qing was already gone. "You're really not worried?" Jian Fengqi shook his head. Hearing the footsteps outside leave, Mu Hongyu hissed and gently rubbed her shoulders. The Mahayana realm was really hard to cultivate. She tried all kinds of methods, but she still couldn't break through. Instead, she would often run to other places for no reason. Fortunately, she hadn't gone to any strange places so far. But in this illusory god palace, she had to be extra careful. She indignantly took out the map that Chu Luiyue had left behind and started studying it. Phoenix Cry Mountain. The mountain breeze blew, and a tender green two-tian baby was swaying gently. Dumpling sat alone on the side cultivating. Below her, there was a layer of reddish gold flames burning silently. The surrounding energy quickly surged into her body. The aura surged and the pressure was prominent. After opening her 7th meridian, her cultivation speed had obviously increased a lot. After all, even Yi Zhao had only opened his 7th meridian. Now that she had reached such a level before officially becoming an adult, it was really heaven-defying. After a long time, Dumpling finally stopped and slowly opened her eyes. Those big black grape-like eyes seemed to have become clearer and brighter than before, and a bright light flashed through them. Sigh. So boring. Dumpling let out a long breath. Her small hands were holding her cheeks, and her chubby little face was full of worry. Although it was comfortable to stay here, it was really lonely to be alone. The key was that Ayu wasn't in the illusory god palace, and she couldn't find anyone to talk to. Dumpling sighed again. She suddenly sensed something, and quickly turned her head to take a look. There was nothing behind him, nothing at all. Dumpling blinked. Strange. She clearly felt a pair of eyes looking at her just now. Dumpling's big eyes turned, and retracted her gaze. She reached out and gently touched the two-tian baby's leaves. It grew very quickly here, and now it had 5 leaves. Verdant and tender, full of vitality. As if affected by it, Phoenix Cry Mountain seemed to be more lively than before. At the foot of the mountain, some green sprouts had already grown on the originally bare ground. Although it had just grown out not long ago, it looked exceptionally pleasing to the eye. When will I be able to open my 9th meridian? Dumpling muttered softly. In the past, she didn't care much about this matter. Even if she knew that she had the purest bloodline, she didn't think too much about it. But now it was different. Only by opening the 9th meridian could he save Grandpa Chief. Moreover, only by being strong enough could he protect Ayu. As she spoke, she suddenly struck out with a backhand attack. A cluster of reddish gold flames flew out. Come out! Chapter 2335. This time she hit nothing. No one appeared. Not even a trace was left behind. It seemed like there was really nothing. Tuanzi didn't believe it. She stood up and ran over. Then she searched carefully in all directions. What running so fast? She could not help but mutter under her breath. She was sure that someone was watching her in the dark. Unfortunately, she could not find out who it was. She put one hand on her waist and shouted at the empty void in front of her. If you have the ability to secretly watch me, then don't be afraid to come out. No one responded. Dumpling pouted angrily. I'm going to be angry. Still, no one responded. Tuanzi was so angry that she turned around to leave and sat down again. Whoosh! As if sensing her anger, the energy of heaven and earth around Feng Ming Mountain suddenly surged quickly. In addition, the two-tian baby was also shaking, making the movement even louder. Puff! A reddish gold flame suddenly burned not far in front of Dumpling. Puff puff! With the first one taking the lead, the rest naturally flowed smoothly. A few more bursts of flames erupted from the mountain rocks. Soon, these energies all rushed into Dumpling's body. They were purer and faster than the previous ones. Dumpling's entire body was quickly wrapped in flames, and her aura was constantly rising. She did not believe that when she was more powerful, she would definitely be able to catch the other party. God-slaying mound. Dark clouds gathered, and the sky was dark. Under the gloomy sky, The space distorted and turned into vortexes, crazily accumulating energy. And Chu Luyue was standing in the middle of these countless vortexes. She closed her eyes, and her slender white fingers plucked the void. The sound of the zither rose into the air. And in the depths of this tomb, there was also a guqin music, which was constantly responding to her. Every note, every tone was perfectly matched. Chu Luyue's blood rushed in her body, as if something was about to break out. At a certain moment, the last guqin music finally fell, hovering in the empty and boundless wilderness for a long time. She suddenly opened her eyes. Then, she waved her hand gently, and the countless vortexes above fell down one after another. One by one, they entered the stone beside Chu Luyue's feet. Countless holes were torn in the void, and for a time, violent spatial turbulence surged. At first glance, the surrounding space was like a soft and fragile piece of cloth that could be easily torn apart. However, these did not pose any threat to Chu Luyue. Those terrifying auras only lingered in their own positions and did not approach Chu Luyue at all. Of course, it was very likely that this was because the more terrifying part of the spatial energy was actually under her control. Chu Luyue raised his hand. A stone at his feet flew over and entered his interspatial ring. Then the second piece, the third piece. Chu Luyue was a little worried that the interspatial ring would not be able to withstand the power and pressure of these stones. But he was surprised to find that his worry was completely unnecessary. The interspatial ring didn't seem to be affected at all when the last stone entered it. It was silent, tolerant, and powerful. She stared at the interspatial ring, and then said to Rongxiu, "This ring is really much more powerful than I expected." This ring was given to her by Rongxiu, and it was the most precious treasure of the Yuntian Tower. Rongxiu smiled and said, "Yes. Of course, anything given to you is the best." Chu Luyue's heart warmed. Then, she raised her eyes and looked forward with a slightly serious expression. Rongxiu asked, "Do you have the whereabouts of the zither score?" Chu Luyue nodded and then shook her head. "Actually, if I'm not wrong, that zither score should already be in my hands." Rongxiu raised his sword-like eyebrows slightly. Chu Luyue pondered for a moment, as if she was thinking about how to explain. Every note of the last zither score is hidden in the void. So just now, when I used the two zither scores to summon the third one, such a scene appeared. The void was constantly twisting and collapsing, and vortexes appeared one after another. The third zither score was successfully summoned, but because it had completely merged with the void and was cut into 3,000 pieces, in the end, there was not a single complete piece. Of course, to be precise, there were the broken tombstones. Now they were all lying in Chu Luyue's interspatial ring. In this way, it was not wrong to say that she had already obtained the zither score. It was just that she probably still needed to completely piece it together and reassemble it. No wonder Senior Jing didn't notice the existence of the last zither score back then. Chu Luyue rubbed between her eyebrows, feeling a headache. She was the last one to realize this. In other words, the last zither score hasn't merged with the first two. Rongxiu said. Chu Luyue nodded. "I guess I need to wait until I can completely control these stones." However, those represented the power of 3,000 spatial forces. Even though she already had a close connection with these spatial powers, how could it be so easy to completely control them? Even the stones she obtained from the high god tombs were occasionally not obedient, let alone these stones. Rongxiu nodded, his thin lips curling slightly. "But the thing is already in your hands. Completely merging is only a matter of time." "Yes." Chu Luyue let out a long sigh of relief. As long as she reassembled the last zither score and merged it with the first two, all the problems would be solved. Since this matter is over, we should return to the illusory god palace as soon as possible. I wonder how the two divine envoys are doing now. As she spoke, she saw Rongxiu raise his chin. "I'm afraid we'll have to wait." Chu Luyue followed his gaze and raised her eyebrows. Lu Feng and Qi Han were still in the same place, enveloped in divine territory, constantly devouring the power around them. And the aura around them was several times stronger than before. Chu Luyue's eyes flashed as she murmured softly, Are they about to break through to venerable God? Digression. I'm going out today. I don't want everyone to wait, so I'll owe you one. Moi. Chapter 2336. As soon as she said that, Lu Feng's aura surged. Almost at the same time, a heavy pressure spread out from Qi Han's body. The two of them had both broken through to God. Chu Luyue looked up at the sky. In the dark sky, the spatial rifts that had been torn apart were repairing themselves. But there was no Tianlei. Generally speaking, when one broke through to God, it would cause a huge commotion with the Tianlei. Those with greater talent and strength would even attract a golden Tianlei. Chu Luyue had been like that. But now, perhaps because the lightning pool in the illusory god palace was sealed, there was no Tianlei at all. Chu Luyue frowned slightly. Although the two of them had successfully broken through to God, it felt like something was missing. After a while, the surging aura around Lu Feng and Qi Han finally calmed down. The two of them stood up. Master. Chu Luyue's lips curved into a smile. You two are really efficient. The threshold to God was not so easy to cross. For example, little Hachi showed no signs of breaking through until now. Not to mention that the energy here was chaotic. It was rare to be able to break through under such circumstances. You two should follow us back to the illusory god palace later, Chu Luyue said thoughtfully. When the lightning pool opens, we can temper our divine bodies. The two of them answered in unison. Chu Luyue looked ahead. The black wall stood in the distance. After such a big commotion, Senior Jing did not respond. Chu Luyue murmured strangely. She wanted to go and take a look, but after careful consideration, Chu Luyue dismissed the idea. Senior Jing was powerful. If he did not plan to come out, he must have his own considerations. She did not need to disturb him. Chu Luyue made up her mind. Back to the illusory god palace. After making the decision, the group quickly returned. Since Lu Feng and Qi Han had broken through to the god realm, they moved very quickly. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the shore of the illusionary god ocean. Unlike the bustling atmosphere in the past, this place was completely empty. At a glance, there was only a tall man standing with his hands clasped behind his back. This back view looked somewhat familiar. As if sensing their movements, that person turned around. Senior Maozhen? It was indeed him. Chu Lu was very surprised. Why did you suddenly come? Maozhen stroked his beard. This old man has already laid down heavy guards at Divine Dragon Island. I thought that I should come here to take a look, so I came over. Now all the experts of the Divine Ruins world were heading over here. There was no need for him to say anything. With Maozhen around, Chu Luyue immediately felt more at ease. She nodded her head and looked around her again. Why are you alone here? Maozhen said. When this old man came, there wasn't anyone here. I was just about to go up when I bumped into you guys. Hey, where did you guys go? Chu Luyue smiled. Because of some matters, I returned to the god-slaying tomb. Maozhen was a little surprised. Didn't you say that the seventh divine envoy guards the heavenly gate very strictly? Why, this doesn't seem to be the first time she came out, right? Is the seventh divine envoy so easy to talk to? Chu Luyue smiled and said, yes. Yeah, he didn't seem too happy. But so what? Maozhen was speechless. Looking at Chu Luyue's nonchalant expression, Maozhen deeply felt that her question was really not up to standard. I should have known that this girl wouldn't be willing to reason under such circumstances. What a coincidence that we arrived at the same time. Maozhen chuckled. Even though this old man has long heard of the illusionary god palace, this is my first time here. Chu Luyue had briefly chatted with him before. The great phoenix dragon's ancestor, Mao Lin, also came from the illusionary god palace. But later, these two ancient divine beasts left the illusionary god palace. Now Chu Luyue already knew some of the rumors back then, so he guessed that the departure of the great phoenix dragon and the crimson gold heavenly phoenix should also be related to that incident. But the specific truth was hard to say. Chu Luyue raised his hand. Senior Maozhen, please. Passing over the illusionary god sea again, Chu Luyue could vaguely feel that he seemed to be able to vaguely feel that several spatial forces below were intertwining with each other. In the silence, undercurrents were surging. Chu Luwa glanced down and frowned slightly. Rong Xiao noticed her movements and looked over. You are, Chu Luwa said softly. This illusionary god sea is really more powerful than expected. She had already faintly sensed that what she saw last time was actually just the tip of the iceberg. Diwu Zhangze was trapped in the deepest part of this sea. If they wanted to rescue him, they indeed needed to make sufficient preparations. Then, they successfully reached the Silver Bridge and walked toward the Divine Gate. Just as they arrived in front of the Divine Gate, the barrier opened automatically. Chu Luiyue was stunned. The so-called Divine Gate doesn't seem that difficult to enter? As Mao Zhen spoke, he stepped into it. Meow! Chu Luiyue was about to stop him when he saw that Mao Zhen had already walked in. Then nothing happened. Everything was as usual. Chu Luiyue waited for a while, but the seventh divine envoy didn't appear. Mao Zhen turned around and waved at them. What are you waiting for? Come here. Rong Xiao held Chu Luiyue's hand and walked in. Lu Feng and Qi Han followed closely behind. After entering, Chu Luiyue looked around. This place was empty as usual, but there seemed to be a slight difference. It seemed to be more deserted than before. The seventh god is so busy that he doesn't even guard the divine gate? Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes slightly. Jin Yunlai wasn't such a person. Besides, even if he really had something to do, he could have asked the other divine envoys for help. But there was nothing. Perhaps he was delayed by something? Mao Zhen asked. What could be more important than guarding the divine gate? This was the only entrance to the illusory god palace. Its importance was needless to say. Swoosh! A sound of something breaking through the air suddenly came from afar. Chu Luiyue and the others looked up and saw a figure passing through the air, heading in the direction of the illusory god palace. Wait, the illusory god palace? Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat as he stared at that person. He didn't turn in any other direction. He was heading straight for the illusory god palace. Soon, another person was heading in another direction. He wasn't slow, as if he was in a hurry to do something. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. The illusory god palace was sacred and honorable. Most people here could only look at it from afar. What was going on this time? Chu Luiyue hesitated for a moment and said, Let's go and take a look. Chapter 2337. They followed the star path to the palace of the illusory god. The deeper they went, the stranger Chu Luiyue felt. In the past, both sides of the star path were quite lively, but now it was deserted. It was really strange. Did the people here all go to the palace of the illusory god? Chu Luiyue murmured doubtfully. As soon as he finished speaking, he bumped into an acquaintance. Senior Xiaoran? Seeing that familiar figure, Chu Luiyue immediately spoke. Xiaoran had his arms crossed and was walking over lazily. When he heard this voice, he immediately turned around. He smiled when he saw Chu Luiyue. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Mao Zhen and the rest from the corner of his eyes. He had seen Rong Xiao before, but the other three were extremely unfamiliar. His heart skipped a beat, and he guessed something. These few came with you this time? Chu Luiyue nodded and then introduced them. Senior Xiaoran, this is Senior Mao Zhen. Hearing this name, Xiaoran's expression changed slightly. Mao, Great Phoenix Dragon Clan? Senior Mao Zhen is the clan leader of the Great Phoenix Dragon Clan. Chu Luiyue explained. Xiaoran thought to himself. He felt that this person looked unusual just now, but her identity still surprised him. So it's clan leader Mao Zhen. Xiaoran smiled and cupped his hands, but his heart was filled with emotions. This little girl was a bit too powerful. First, she made an agreement with the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Now, it seemed that she had a good relationship with the clan leader of the Great Phoenix Dragon Clan. It was difficult for ordinary people to even see an ancient divine beast, but she had a good relationship with both clans at the same time. Except for the fact that she didn't have a bloodline totem, everything else was really heaven-defying. As he spoke, he looked at Lu Feng and Qi Han behind him. These two, they looked very young, but they were already gods. Chu Luiyue glanced back. The two immediately bowed. Lu Feng, Qi Han, greets Senior Xiaoran. Xiaoran was very surprised. You, These two are also your subordinates? Chu Luiyue nodded. Xiao Ran was speechless. It was one thing for her to become a god at such a young age, but her subordinates were all so powerful as well. How could he let others live? Were these people really ordinary people from the Divine Ruins world, who didn't even have a bloodline totem? Xiao Ran felt a sense of crisis and defeat. Chu Luiyue asked, Senior Xiao Ran, where are you going? I just saw that some people seem to be heading towards the palace of the illusory god. Xiao Ran said, Of course I'm going to watch the show. Oh, that's right. You guys just came back, so you don't know yet. The Divine Lord is going to help the 6th Divine Envoy reconstruct his divine body. This kind of thing was hard to come by in 10,000 years, so everyone passed by. It was just a short sentence, but it contained too much information. Chu Luiyue's heart trembled violently. Divine Master. If he didn't guess wrong, wasn't that the Lord of the Illusory God Palace? The Divine Master is coming out? No, Xiao Ran said. The Divine Master is in charge of the Palace of the Illusory God, and is extremely sacred. Other than the Divine Envoys, no one can see him. Besides, the Divine Master is extremely powerful. Even if he doesn't come out of the Palace of the Illusory God, it's easy for him to rebuild the divine body of the 6th Divine Envoy. Chu Luiyue pursed his lips and felt a bit disappointed. But when he thought about it carefully, it was actually normal. Even the Palace of the Illusory God was so difficult to enter, so the Divine Master was naturally even more difficult to meet. But if this was a small matter for the Divine Master, he could have done it in private. Why did he have to make it public? And the 6th Divine Envoy. The Divine Envoys are all powerful people. Why doesn't the 6th Divine Envoy have a divine body? Of course it's because... Xiao Ran paused, looked around, and then lowered his voice. The 6th Divine Envoy used to have a divine body, but I heard that he went out of the Palace of the Illusory God a while ago, and when he came back, his divine body was already damaged. It wasn't a big deal. With the 6th Divine Envoy's identity and strength, he could go to the lightning pool and borrow the power of Tianlei to rebuild his divine body. But isn't the lightning pool sealed? So now we can only ask the Divine Master for help. What happened to the 6th Divine Envoy, that even his divine body was damaged? Chu Luiyue was very surprised. According to the ranking, the 6th Divine Envoy's status was slightly higher than the 7th Divine Envoy. How did he end up in such a state? Who knows? Xiao Ran shook his head. Let's go and take a look. It's rare to see the Divine Master personally take action. Perhaps it would be beneficial to improve your cultivation after seeing it. Chu Luiyue's lips curled up. Rebuilding a divine body. She was very experienced in this matter. But Xiao Ran was right. After all, it was the Divine Master's action. The significance of it was incomparable. Okay. The group was about to go and take a look when they suddenly heard footsteps from the side. Chu Luiyue turned his head and saw that it was Yin Qing. Your Highness. He came in front of Rong Xiu and bowed respectfully. Then, he handed over a letter with both hands. An urgent letter from the Yuntian Tower. Please take a look. Rong Xiu raised his hands to take it, opened it, and glanced at it with narrowed eyes. A faint chill surged out of his body. Chu Luiyue asked curiously, Rong Xiu, what's wrong? Rong Xiu put the letter away. There's a small problem. For Rong Xiu to say this, it definitely isn't a small trouble. Chu Luiyue said. Then, do you want to go back and take a look? Rong Xiu shook his head. I'll go back to my place first. I'll find you after I've taken care of the matter. Chu Luiyue nodded. There's no hurry. The Yuntian Tower is more important. As for the Palace of the Illusory God, she just wanted to see what was going on. Rong Xiu nodded and took Yin Qing in another direction. Chu Luiyue also looked away. Let's go. Let's go to the Palace of the Illusory God. Of course, they couldn't enter the Palace of the Illusory God. They could only stand outside the door. When Chu Luiyue and the others arrived, hundreds of people had already gathered outside the Palace of the Illusory God. The place was bustling with noise and excitement. At this time, they were all looking for something. Chu Luiyue took a closer look and saw that there was a bronze mirror in front of the door, which was quietly floating in midair. A figure gradually appeared in the bronze mirror. Is that the sixth oracle? Chapter 2338. Someone asked. That shouldn't be the case. Wasn't the divine body of the sixth divine envoy already destroyed? Someone in the crowd immediately retorted. Then who is this? I don't know. He looks quite young. I haven't seen him before either. The person in the mirror had his head lowered, so no one could see his face clearly. However, Chu Luiyue, who was standing behind the crowd, suddenly froze. That figure, that aura, she was clearly very familiar with it. A bold guess appeared in her mind, causing her to clench her fists. Her heart was hanging high in her throat. Following that person finally moved. He raised his hand and twisted his neck. His voice was lazy. So noisy. His voice was a little hoarse, and he was faintly lacking in energy. However, that casual tone still shocked Chu Luiyue. Lan Xiao. It's really him. She almost couldn't control herself as she quickly walked forward. There were already several layers of people in front of her. Originally, she wouldn't have been able to squeeze in, but at this moment, her movements were extremely fast and clean. Please make way. Hearing the voice, a few people who were curiously staring at the mirror turned their heads impatiently. What are you squeezing for? When they saw that the person standing behind was actually Chu Luiyue, their voices stopped abruptly. Chu Luiyue tried her best to suppress the emotions in her heart as she repeated herself. I said please make way. How can you be so rude when you're asking for help? That face of his clearly had the words "get lost" written all over it, alright? A few people were dissatisfied and muttered to themselves. However, they didn't dare to offend her, so they all made way. You please. Who didn't know that Chu Luiyue was extremely arrogant in the Illusion God Palace? She even dared to talk back to the seventh divine envoy? She probably didn't cherish her life, and her combat strength was extremely strong. If she really wanted to be unreasonable, who could do anything to her? Thus, due to various considerations, no one wanted to provoke her. If they could, they would. If they could, they would. Soon, a wide path appeared in front of her. Chu Luiyue thanked them and walked over. Xiao Ran made a tisk sound. He had been in the Illusory God Palace for so many years, but he wasn't even half as intimidating as this little girl. There was really no comparison between people. Seeing that Mao Zhen and the others had already caught up, he also went forward with a smile. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Many people around were secretly annoyed when they heard this, but they could only endure it. There was nothing he could do about it. There were some people he could not afford to offend. Chu Luiyue quickly came to the front. Standing there, he was only 10 steps away from the bronze mirror. Thus, he could clearly see everything inside. Her eyes were fixed on the person in the mirror. At this moment, he was sitting on the ground with one of his long legs bent, and his elbow resting on his knee. Even though he couldn't see his face clearly, Chu Luiyue was certain of his identity just from his unique lazy and carefree aura. As if sensing something, he raised his head and looked over. A handsome and elegant face entered Chu Luiyue's eyes. Her heart felt like it had been hammered by something. This was a completely unfamiliar face. She had seen countless faces that Lan Xiao had transformed into, but none of them were the same as this one. It turned out that this was his true appearance. But for some reason, the moment she saw this face, she was actually certain that he was him. Perhaps it was because that similar expression, as well as that playful gaze that had never changed from looking at the mortal world with a smile. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but take half a step forward. However, just as she moved, she was stopped by an invisible barrier. Chi Han immediately asked in a low voice, Master, are you all right? Chu Luiyue shook her head, indicating that she was fine. However, her gaze was still fixed on Lan Xiao. Obviously, Lan Xiao could see her too. The moment their eyes met, he first revealed a hint of joy. Then, he suddenly thought of something, and a hint of anger appeared on his face. Chu Luiyue noticed the change in his expression. Just as she was puzzled, she heard Lan Xiao cursing in a low voice. Mother ***, how ruthless. His voice wasn't loud, but Chu Luiyue, who was standing nearby, heard it clearly. She frowned slightly, but in the next moment, she knew why Lan Xiao had such a reaction. A long black whip suddenly fell, and hit Lan Zhao's back harshly. Smack! The loud and sharp sound of the whip came suddenly and fiercely, instantly silencing everyone who was watching. Everyone was taken aback and subconsciously tensed up. Wasn't he helping the sixth divine envoy reconstruct her divine body? Then who was this young man who was being hit now? And this time, it was extremely ruthless. With one whip, it immediately tore open the skin and flesh. Lan Zhao staggered from the hit and almost fell to the ground, but he managed to support himself with one arm. Dark red blood stains gradually spread from his shoulder. Even though the injury was on his back, everyone could guess how serious the injury was when they saw his pale face and trembling lips. The originally noisy crowd fell into dead silence. Chu Luyue clenched her teeth and stared at everything in the mirror. Lan Zhao seemed to be trapped in a cage at this moment. The surroundings were dark and cramped, and there was only a lamp hanging on the back wall. But that lamp was obviously left behind, so that everyone could clearly see Lan Zhao's battered and exhausted appearance. Other than that, there were no other clues. It was impossible to determine where this was. Smack! That long whip fell again. Lan Zhao regained his senses, clenched his teeth, and grabbed it with his bare hands. A muffled sound was heard. That long whip was caught in his hand. However, it was only for a moment. In the next second, that long whip was suddenly pulled out by an even stronger force, bringing a string of blood. Lan Zhao groaned, and his hand was instantly a mess of flesh and blood. The moment he grabbed the long whip, countless sharp barbs grew out of it. The moment he touched that whip, Lan Zhao knew it was bad, but it was too late to stop. In the end, he was hit by this. Lan Zhao lowered his head and looked at his hand. The wound was badly mutilated, and it was so deep that his bones could be seen. Blood seeped out from the corner of his lips. He licked his lips, and the rich, sweet, and fishy taste made his heart even more frustrated. Ha! Your methods are as dirty as always. Lan Zhao spat out a mouthful of blood, and his lips curled into an extremely evil smile as he scolded. Who was he talking to? The master god from the palace of the illusory god? But why did it sound like they already knew each other? Also, there seemed to be a deep hatred between the two of them. Chu Luyue had never seen Lan Zhao have such a strong hatred for anyone. No one answered his words, but that whip was raised again and brought down. This time, it was aimed at Lan Zhao's face. Chapter 2339. Lan Zhao cursed in his heart and attacked again. However, this time, the black whip's speed was even faster than his. Smack! A bloody gash appeared on Lan Zhao's face. The wound was at least an inch long, and instantly destroyed half of his face. Chu Luyue's heart seemed to be clenched tightly by something. Lan Zhao usually cared about his appearance the most, especially his current face, which was only restored after he reconstructed his godly body. Just like that, he lashed out in front of so many people. The impact on him was self-evident. Lan Zhao tilted his head and didn't move for a long time. The crowd in front of the bronze mirror held their breaths unconsciously. Even though the whip didn't hit them, they still felt a chill down their spines when they looked at it through the mirror. If it landed on them. After a long time, Lan Zhao finally raised his hand and touched the wound on his face. It was extremely painful, sticky, and sweet. The smile on his face gradually froze. Of course, he knew why the other party did this. It was nothing more than using the most intense method to humiliate and trample him in all aspects. The other party knew what he cared about the most and purposely destroyed it. There was nothing more painful than this. Chu Luyue clenched her teeth, and a layer of coldness enveloped her body. She had to expend a lot of energy to restrain her urge to rush forward. What kind of hatred did the godly master of the palace of the illusory god have with Lan Zhao? Why did he use such a method to deal with him? He obviously wanted Lan Zhao to suffer a fate worse than death. At this moment, a low and hoarse voice came from the mirror. These 3 whips are your punishment. This voice seemed to come from an extremely distant and empty place. Every word and sentence was divine and oppressive. Chu Luyue widened her eyes instantly, and shock flashed across her eyes. This voice clearly belonged to the owner of that eye. Immediately after, the crowd behind her responded in unison. Greetings, godly master. Instantly, It was as if a sudden clap of thunder exploded beside her ear, causing Chu Liyue's heart to tremble. Godly master, godly master. She had long suspected that the owner of the eye had some kind of close relationship with the palace of the illusory god. Otherwise, the illusion of the illusory god palace would not have appeared in the Red Moon Desert. The owner of that eye had only decided to attack them after luring them into it. However, Chu Liyue never would have thought that this person was actually the person with the highest status in the illusory god palace, and also the one who truly wielded power in the illusory god palace. For a moment, Chu Liyue's mind was in a mess. Countless thoughts were overturned at this moment, and countless guesses gushed out one after another, filling her mind, causing her to be in a state of confusion. She took a deep breath. Compared to the previous time in the Red Moon Desert, the sound this time was actually a little different. It was less sinister and cold, and more sacred and dignified. Suddenly, it was very easy to make people feel respect and admiration, and be willing to submit. Lan Xiao sneered. Punishment? You think you can punish him just because you want to? Who gave you the right? Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. This person is so arrogant. How dare he speak to the master god like this? Xiao Ran seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and he looked at the person in the mirror suspiciously. It can't be. Hearing his voice, Chu Liyue turned around and glanced at him. When she saw his expression, Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. Senior Xiao Ran, you know him? Her voice was very soft, but the people around them were standing very close, so many of them heard it. Many people looked over. Xiao Ran looked conflicted. I'm not too sure either. I just feel that this person seems a little familiar. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had officially seen Lan Zhao's face, so why would Xiao Ran find him familiar? He was a Xian master, so he definitely would not make a mistake in this kind of thing. What do you mean? Chu Liyue asked sternly. Xiao Ran paused, hesitated for a while, and then said, From what I see, this person seems a little like Lord Second Priest. Second Priest? Chu Liyue asked instinctively. Who is that? Xiao Ran pursed his lips. It was obvious that he did not want to talk about this too much. This was the first time Chu Liyue saw such a worried look on his face. Suddenly, someone in the crowd asked in surprise. Second Priest. Is he the one who betrayed the Divine Master back then? Clearly, Xiao Ran was not the only one who had heard of this name. The crowd became restless. Seeing that the matter could no longer be hidden, Xiao Ran gritted his teeth and said, Back then, other than the Divine Envoys, there were also 2 high priests by the Divine Master's side. Because the Divine Master was indebted to these 2 for teaching him, their status was higher than that of the first Divine Envoy. But back then, for some reason, the 2 high priests and the Crimson Gold Celestial Phoenix joined hands and betrayed the illusory god palace. I thought that the 2 high priests had died in that chaotic battle, but who knew? He sighed. In that battle back then, countless cultivators in the illusory god palace were killed or injured. Even the divine envoys were all killed at that time. What? Chu Liyue was shocked. All the divine envoys were killed? Then the ones now? They were chosen by the divine master later on. Xiao Ran said, that battle was very intense. Because he was young back then, he was lucky enough to escape death, and only saw it from afar. But it had been tens of thousands of years, and he could no longer remember clearly what happened back then. So when Lan Xiao appeared, he didn't recognize him immediately. But when he heard this voice, he recalled the past buried deep in his memory. Back then this second priest was also so arrogant and unbridled, because there weren't many people left in the illusory god palace at that time, and later, the higher-ups ordered them not to spread the news, so no one dared to mention it again. Coincidentally, Xiao Ran was one of them. Chu Liyue's temples throbbed, and the blood in her body was about to boil. She opened her mouth and asked, "Then, what about the other high priest?" "You mean the high priest?" Xiao Ran frowned, and thought carefully for a while before shaking his head. That person made the same choice as the second priest back then. Since the second priest is still alive, then, maybe the high priest is still alive too. I just don't know why the Divine Master didn't kill the two high priests after they committed such a crime. Instead, He kept them until now and suddenly let them out. High priest, high priest. Chu Liyue's heart seemed to be surging crazily. She tried her best to control herself and asked softly, Senior Xiaoran, do you know the high priest's name? Xiaoran shook his head. What kind of status did the two high priests have back then? How would I know this? Chu Liyue didn't give up. Then what about their appearance? Since you've seen the second priest, then you should know the high priest too, right? This, Xiaoran thought for a while. I can't remember anything else. I only remember that the high priest wore the purple gold divine armor and had unparalleled divine power. Chapter 2340. In an instant, Chu Liyue's brain buzzed. Purple gold, godly armor? She murmured subconsciously. Then, she lowered her eyes and looked at the interspatial ring on her hand. There was a purple scale armor there, silent. Yes, rumor has it that the purple gold godly armor was the #1 armor in the world personally forged by the high priest. It's a pity that the purple gold godly armor was damaged in that great battle, and the high priest himself. Xiaoran shook his head. 10,000 years had passed, and the few memories he had in the first place had also become blurry. However, the scene of the fire burning in the palace of the illusory god, the flames soaring into the sky, and the godly armor falling apart, was deeply engraved in his mind. Even though he hadn't taken the initiative to think about it all these years, thinking about it now still made him sigh. It's not just me. Everyone who survived back then also thought that the two high priests had died. In the years that followed, the divine master reappointed the divine envoys, but no new high priests were chosen. Naturally, there were even fewer people who brought this up. Chu Liyue fell silent and turned to look at the bronze mirror. High priest, second high priest. So this was the true identity of Debao and Lan Xiao. How were they dead? They were clearly suppressed in the Red Moon Desert and couldn't come out for 10,000 years. Chu Liyue was a little dazed, and she couldn't recover for a long time. Ever since they were captured and brought to the palace of the illusory god, Chu Liyue didn't think that they might be from here. But she would never have thought that these two people would have such honorable statuses. Then other than the two of them, what about Diwu Zhangzi? Thinking of this, she immediately asked, Senior Xiaoran, is there a third high priest in the palace of the illusory god? Xiaoran shook his head. No. After so many years, the palace of the illusory god only had those two high priests. Chu Liyue's brows furrowed tightly. If Diwu Zhangzi wasn't a high priest, then what was his identity? Why was he imprisoned in the same place as Debao and Lan Xiao? She faintly felt that she seemed to have touched on some long-buried truth. But at the same time, there were many questions in front of her, making it difficult for her to distinguish. She clenched her fists and took a deep breath. Only then did she gradually feel her strength recover a little. The amount of information she had just received was simply too much, causing her entire body to go numb. Seeing that Chu Liyue's expression didn't seem right, Xiaoran asked worriedly, What happened to you? Chu Liyue forced a smile and shook his head. It's nothing. It's just that I suddenly know so many secrets. It's a little hard for me to digest them all at once. Xiaoran immediately understood. This was normal. It would be difficult for anyone to react quickly after hearing so much at once. He comforted her. Actually, it's all in the past. Don't take it to heart. Chu Liyue didn't say anything. This matter concerned Debao, Lan Xiao and Diwu Zhangzi. How could she not care? No wonder the profound formations that Debao had given her back then overlapped so much with the ones on the star path. As the high priest, wasn't it normal for him to know this? She closed her eyes and tossed aside the distracting thoughts in her mind. Then she stared straight ahead. In the mirror, Lan Xiao sneered. He could hear what they were saying. His reaction had already explained everything. Lan Xiao, you betrayed the palace of the illusory god back then, which was a capital offense. On account of our many years of friendship, I didn't take your life. I thought that 10,000 years would be enough for you to reflect. But now it seems that you're still as stubborn as ever. Since that's the case, today, I'll use your divine body to reconstruct the divine body of the sixth divine envoy. This way, you'll die a worthy death. That voice was still dignified. Every word and sentence was like a holy judgment. Lan Xiao sneered and scolded. Bah! I don't have any *T relationship with you. Don't *King flatter yourself. Oh, right, I almost forgot, you don't have a face. Smack. The black whip suddenly lashed out. After this whip flew out, it actually wrapped tightly around Lan Zhao's right arm. Drops of blood seeped out. Lan Zhao's facial features were distorted for a moment, and his face became even paler. It was obvious that this had caused him great pain. However, he actually endured it, and didn't even let out a cry of pain. Chu Liyue's heart was in her throat. That person wanted to use Lan Xiao to reconstruct the divine body of the sixth divine envoy. What kind of method would that person use? After all, Lan Zhao's divine body was also reconstructed with great difficulty. Suddenly her eyebrows twitched. Wait! There were 5 golden tianlei in Lan Zhao's body. Previously, Xiao Ran said that the lightning pool had been sealed, so the divine master wanted to do it personally. Then this time, he actually wanted to forcefully take away the power of the tianlei in Lan Zhao's body, and let the sixth god use it. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared beside Lan Xiao without a sound. The sixth divine envoy. Someone in the crowd exclaimed. Needless to say, Chu Liyue could also tell that this translucent figure was the sixth divine envoy. But why did it look strangely familiar? Chu Liyue subconsciously frowned. At this moment, the sixth divine envoy suddenly turned his head. That was a face that Chu Liyue would never forget no matter what. Her heart pounded as she blurted out in shock. Emo Shiqian. Chapter 2341. This person was indeed Emo Shiqian, who had self-destructed and escaped. Chu Liyue had been secretly sending people to investigate Emo Shiqian's whereabouts, but there had been no progress. She never expected that he was the sixth divine envoy. His divine body was destroyed. It was just that he had no choice but to self-destruct. Many people turned to look at her when they heard her voice. Xiao Ran asked curiously, You know the sixth divine envoy? That person had just returned a while ago. Logically speaking, she shouldn't have seen him before, right? And looking at her, it was obvious that she knew him long ago. Chu Liyue pursed her lips tightly. I guess so. However, it was the kind of acquaintance that made enemies. Xiao Ran was stunned. Chu Liyue sneered. They all said that the sixth divine envoy went out, and only returned recently. But it turns out that he went to the divine ruins world? How interesting. Hearing her say this, Xiao Ran suddenly understood something. So she had seen him in the divine ruins world. But looking at Chu Liyue, it seemed like she had a deep enmity towards the sixth divine envoy. He thought for a while, but seeing Chu Liyue's tense and cold jaw, he swallowed his words. Of course, Emo Shiqian also saw Chu Liyue. A deep sense of fear and dread flashed across his eyes. Then he remembered that they were already in the illusory god palace, and Chu Liyue couldn't barge in and do anything. Only then did he relax a little. Thinking about the situation, Emo Shiqian's lips curled into a cold smile. Then he looked at Lan Xiao. Second priest, it seems that I'll have to trouble you this time. Lan Xiao sneered. Who do you think you are? How dare you fight with me? This golden tianlei power. Even if I take the initiative to give it to you, can you afford it? His words were full of ridicule and contempt. Obviously, he didn't take Emo Shiqian seriously at all. I heard that you died very miserably back then. Why, now that only half of your soul is left, what are you still dreaming about? These 2 simple sentences accurately hit Emo Shiqian's sore spot. Firstly, his status was indeed incomparable to Lan Zhao's. Secondly, as a god's messenger, he was forced to self-destruct and escape by Chu Liyue. It was indeed embarrassing if word got out. After all, at that time, Chu Liyue's cultivation level was actually lower than his. Of course, this was also because a portion of his memories and strength had been sealed at that time. It was only after returning to the illusory god palace that he finally recovered. However, this only made him even more terrified, because only at that moment did he realize what he had done in the past, and offended those existences that he shouldn't have offended. After returning, Emo Shiqian stayed in his room for a long time. He was always on tenterhooks, afraid that the punishment would come. But for some reason, after such a long time, there was still no movement at all. And now, the God Lord wanted to help him reconstruct his God body. He finally calmed down. This also meant that the God Lord had made up his mind to protect him. Therefore, when he saw Chu Liyue now, although he still felt fear subconsciously, he wasn't too worried. After all, everything he did was to help the God Lord snatch the Guqin score. Thinking of this, Mo Shiqian felt more confident. Second priest, when you betrayed the God Lord in the illusory God Palace, you committed a capital crime. It's already the God Lord's mercy that you're still alive today. But not only are you ungrateful, you're also arrogant and don't have any remorse. What right do you have to criticize me? Lan Zhao's eyelids twitched. Dog, you're ugly enough. Don't talk so much so that you don't dirty my ears. You. Mo Shiqian was instantly enraged. No one would be happy to hear such words. But his rationality was still there. He knew that the more it was like this, the more he couldn't make a scene. Anyway, the God Lord and so many people were watching. This Lan Zhao could only be punished and humiliated. No matter how good his words were, the punishment and torture that he deserved would not be any less. Rip, there was the sound of clothes tearing. It was that black whip that wrapped around Lan Zhao's arm. And with a sudden tug, it tore his sleeve into pieces. Under the tattered clothes, there were bloody wounds. Lan Zhao cursed, and blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Chu Liyue's heart trembled. That person planned to tear Lan Zhao's arm off just like that. The 5 golden Tianlei turned into his limbs and essence core, which helped him reconstruct his divine body. Now that the power of the Tianlei was forcefully extracted, then Chu Liyue didn't dare to think about it anymore. Her mind spun wildly as she kept thinking. What other way could she save Lan Zhao? Countless thoughts appeared in her mind, but she rejected them. How could this be so easy? The person who wanted to harm Lan Zhao was the God Lord of the illusory God Palace. In this place, who else had a higher status than him? She couldn't do it forcefully. She might die before saving Lan Zhao. Who would be able to stop all of this openly? Lan Zhao gritted his teeth and used all his strength to resist. But everything was under the other party's control. If he could resist the other party, he wouldn't have been forcefully brought back and locked up. Now he could only hold on for a short, while even if he tried his best. If this continued, crack. The crisp sound of bones breaking suddenly sounded. That arm of Lan Zhao's suddenly presented an extremely strange posture. The power of the black whip was too shocking, and it directly tore his arm off. The crowd quietened down. The atmosphere became deadly silent. Many people had complicated expressions and different reactions as they looked at the scene in front of them. All these years, the God Lord had been staying in the Illusion God Palace and had never come out. All the big and small matters in the Illusion God Palace were handed over to the God emissaries. Now that the God Lord finally made a move, he actually wanted to tear apart the second priest's divine body in front of everyone and forcefully extract his power to transfer to the 6th God emissary. Although the second priest chose to betray back then and deserved to be executed, this method was indeed too bloody and cruel. This was definitely more painful and torturous than killing him directly. Actually, to the many cultivators in the Illusion God Palace, they had seen all kinds of fighting and killing scenes. To be able to reach their current cultivation level, which one of them didn't have blood on their hands. But the scene in front of them couldn't help but make some people feel uncomfortable. It was good that the God Lord wanted to help the 6th God emissary reconstruct his divine body, but he obviously wanted to use this opportunity to punish the second priest and make an example out of him at the same time. But the God Lord was the God Lord after all. It was not up to them to judge what was right or wrong. Rip! A piece of flesh on Lan Zhao's arm was violently torn apart. The wound was so deep that the bone could be seen. A bright golden light appeared and flickered silently. Because he used the golden Tianlei to reconstruct his divine body, Lan Zhao's bones were also golden. Soon after, the black whip tightened again. Chapter 2342. At this moment, a stream of light suddenly broke through the air. Chu Liyue heard the noise and looked up instinctively. It was actually a golden stream of light. It was dazzling, holy, and powerful. It was wrapped in a heavy pressure, causing people to unconsciously feel reverence and submission. In an instant, the stream of light fell into the palace of the illusory god. Then, Chu Luyue and the others saw that the black whip that was tightly binding Lan Zhao's arm was suddenly covered by the golden light. In the next moment, the black whip seemed to have encountered something terrifying and quickly retreated. When Emo Shurqian saw this scene, a deep look of shock flashed across his face. He took a few steps back uncontrollably and almost fell to the ground. He looked like he was in a sorry state. Lan Zhao's tense body suddenly relaxed. When he saw the golden stream of light, he closed his eyes and finally heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, he made a move. Everyone was shocked by this sudden scene. What was going on? Someone made a move and forcibly stopped the Divine Master. That low and hoarse voice contained a trace of suppressed anger as it asked in a deep voice. What's the matter? Emperor, are you trying to interfere with the palace of the illusory god? Instantly, this voice spread far and wide, and clearly fell into everyone's ears. Almost everyone's face was filled with disbelief. Chu Luyue was also shocked. Emperor? Emperor! It was actually this person who made a move. Xiao Ran, who was beside him, murmured, how is this possible? Didn't the emperor never get involved in these things? How come this time? Chu Luyue's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Xiao Ran and asked seriously, Senior Xiao Ran, what is going on? What is the emperor's identity? Since he is so respected, why can't he interfere with the palace of the illusory god? Xiao Ran took a deep breath and explained, because he is not the master of the palace of the illusory god. The emperor's status is indeed unparalleled, because he is the one who inherited the heavenly Tao and controls thousands of deities in the world. Even the Divine Master can't be compared to him. Even the Divine Master was personally enlightened by the emperor to ascend to the heavens and become a deity. However, the monarch has never cared about anything. Even when the palace of the illusory god caused a ruckus, the monarch didn't interfere, right? However, I don't know what happened today, but it actually alarmed the emperor. His intention for stopping the Divine Master in front of so many people was obvious. Chu Liyue's mind was full of thoughts. So that was how it was. No wonder the Divine Master had such a big reaction. Everyone present was also shocked. The Celestial Emperor's sudden move also showed his attitude. How could it not cause others to overthink? Then, a figure slowly appeared in the void. Chu Liyue looked up and frowned. This person was not an emperor, but the one who had appeared at Herb Mountain that day. Just like last time, this person did not reveal his face or figure this time. He only said indifferently, the emperor had no such intention. Today, he acted only to punish the sixth divine envoy. As soon as he finished speaking, the bronze mirror fell into a dead silence. Emo Shurqian's legs went weak, and he looked panicked. He almost knelt on the ground. It's coming. It's still coming. What did the sixth oracle do wrong? After a long while the Divine Master spoke. However, the anger and forbearance from before seemed to have dissipated a lot. The man chuckled. What did he do wrong? Those who should know clearly know. The Divine Master said no more. Chu Liyue's eyes flashed. There was a deep meaning in his words. Emo Shurqian had done a lot of things in the world of divine ruins. This Divine Master obviously knew about it. Yes, the first divine envoy had sent Jiulong and Shi Yan, two divine envoys, to the god-slaying tomb to find the last Guqin score. It was obvious that the Divine Master wanted it. In this way, all the things that Emo Shurqian had done to her could be explained. But this seemed to have angered the emperor? Emo Shurqian can't be the sixth divine envoy. Since that's the case, why waste time and energy to reconstruct his divine body? That person laughed. Now that the emperor wants his life, you want to fight with the emperor? After a long while, that low and hoarse voice finally sounded. I don't dare. But the second priest's identity is special, especially to the palace of the illusory god. You don't need the emperor to remind you of this, right? Of course, if you insist, you can continue. But someone has to bear the consequences. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Chu Liyue finally heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that he didn't intend to interfere in Lan Zhao's matter, but in fact, he had blocked all paths. The divine master of the palace of the illusory god had no choice. Lan Zhao's life was saved. Sure enough, after a long silence, that voice said, "Since this is the emperor's intention, then let's forget about it." But the second priest's mistake back then cannot be forgiven. He will still be detained in the palace of the illusory god and never be released. Lan Zhao cursed and sneered. "Don't worry. I've lived longer than you. Wasn't it just enduring?" He had endured so many years. What was this short time? Sooner or later. The next moment, that golden light flew out and easily trapped Emo Shirqian. Everyone only heard a short and hurried scream. Then Emo Shirqian's figure disappeared. All that was left was a streak of golden light that flew out from within. The figure in the void raised his hand and caught that light. Then he left without hesitation. Almost at the same time, the bronze mirror floating in the air also flew out quickly and disappeared behind the door of the palace of the illusory god. The commotion ended abruptly just like that. Everyone didn't even have time to figure out what had happened before they realized that everything had calmed down. Many people looked at each other. Clearly they hadn't digested what had just happened. Chu Luiyue rubbed his forehead and sighed softly. No matter what, Lan Zhao had escaped. Also, after this incident, the divine master of the palace of the illusory god shouldn't do anything similar to him anymore. It wasn't hard to tell from the words, just now, that Lan Zhao had a trump card that made the other party wary. As for what it was hard to say, but it was still a good thing. I wonder how Emo Shirqian offended the emperor. He was actually stripped of his position as the sixth divine envoy. Xiao Ran murmured strangely. Chu Luiyue clenched his fists. Because he was too nervous just now, his hands were cold and numb. Only now did they recover slightly. The commotion is over. Let's go back. At the same time, the divine envoys in the palace of the illusory god all had different reactions when they heard what had happened to Emo Shirqian. Bang! She swept all the things on the table to the floor with a single sweep. This Emo Shirqian, how dare he lie to me? Chapter 2343. The bottles and jars on the table fell to the ground and shattered instantly. All kinds of pills rolled out. A rich medicinal fragrance instantly filled the air. But at this moment, Xu Jing only felt nauseous when she smelled this smell, because this only reminded her of how she had done her best to help Emo Shirqian refine medicine during this period of time. She knew that Emo Shirqian went out to help the divine master. So after Emo Shirqian came back, she tried her best to please him. Emo Shirqian lost his divine body. It was obvious that he had done his best for the divine master and accidentally ended up like this. Since it was already like this, even if he didn't take credit, he should at least take credit for his hard work. The divine master would definitely treat Emo Shirqian differently because of this and take special care of him, right? This was Xu Jing's truest and most certain thought. She was ranked 8th and did not have an advantage. Some time ago, she had angered the emperor. Not only did she lose control of the Herb Mountain, but she also almost lost the position of the 8th divine envoy. Of course, she needed to rope in a backer. The 6th divine envoy, Emo Shirqian, was the person she chose. Although his ranking was not at the top, he was still stronger than her. Moreover, he had damaged his divine body for the divine master. Once he recovered, wouldn't his future be limitless? The other divine envoys were all capable. They knew that she was already disliked by the emperor, so why would they come to her side? Therefore, after many considerations, only the 6th divine envoy was the best choice. Even if Emo Shirqian was gloomy and suspicious, and spoke rudely several times, she endured it. She only wanted to wait for him to reconstruct his divine body, so that he could be of help. Later, when she heard that the divine master would personally make a move, she was even more delighted. This meant that Emo Shirqian's status on the divine master's side was definitely not low. Therefore, early in the morning, she began to wait excitedly. Who knew that after waiting for so long, not only did Emo Shirqian not reconstruct his divine body, but she also received the emperor's punishment. Emo Shirqian's position as the divine envoy was revoked, and he was even taken away. Even a fool would know that what awaited him was only a dead end. And all her previous thoughts were in vain. Xu Jing was still angry, so she smashed everything in the room again. From the looks of it, Imo Shurqian knew that he had offended the emperor, but he did not say anything. As long as there was a chance to salvage the situation, the divine master would not give up on him so easily. Xu Jing hated Imo Shurqian to the core. Although she had kept a low profile, the divine envoys of the palace of the illusory god should know that she had been helping Imo Shurqian recently. Now that Imo Shurqian was like this, she might be implicated. This was truly one disaster after another. Jin Yunlai happened to pass by the door and heard the sounds of things being smashed. She stopped in her tracks and shook her head. Xu Jing was really too smart for his own good. She thought that everything was under her control, but she didn't know that many things had already deviated from the original track. In the end, the one who was tricked the most was the one who suffered the most. Imo Shurqian's position as the divine envoy had been revoked, which proved that the emperor's previous warning was not just for show. If Xu Jing continued like this, it would end up the same way sooner or later. But actually, his own situation wasn't any better. Thinking of what had happened before, he clenched his fists and continued to walk forward. Chu Luiyue and the others walked towards their residence. But after taking a few steps, a figure appeared out of the corner of her eye. She stopped in her tracks and looked in that direction. In the distance, a person was kneeling under the wall of the palace of the illusory god. Mu Yafeng. Unlike before, her clothes were a little messy, and a few strands of her hair were scattered. She knelt there silently with her head lowered, looking very disheveled. Obviously, she didn't want to kneel. What happened to her? Chu Luiyue asked. Xiao Ran followed her line of sight and clicked her tongue. You mean her? She was caught cheating on the star path. She has been kneeling for a few days. Cheating? Yes. I heard that the 7th divine envoy taught her a lot in private, which allowed her to break several Xian arrays in succession. The first divine envoy found out about this and punished her severely. Chu Luiyue was stunned. Previously, she did find it a little strange, because she knew clearly that Mu Yafeng's talent was not enough to support her breaking those Xian arrays in succession. But at that time, she was busy with her own matters and didn't pay much attention to it. She didn't expect that Jin Yunlai helped her in private. The 7th divine envoy, why would she do this? Wasn't this a little too bold? Who knows? Anyway, not only was Mu Yafeng punished by kneeling, she was also stripped of the right to walk the star path. From now on, she is not allowed to take a step on the star path. Xiao Ran laughed, but his expression was a little cold. Now, many people are suspecting that her previous performance was due to the help of the 7th divine emissary. Things had become so ugly, it was no wonder that people would think so much. But if she can't walk the star path, doesn't that mean that she can no longer enter the palace of the illusory god and ascend to the heavens and become a god? Yes, but who can be blamed for this? Xiao Ran shrugged. Originally, if she cultivated honestly and comprehended one by one, there might be some hope. But now, she couldn't take it anymore and cut off all her escape routes. She just deserved it. He didn't know how many years he had been trapped in the last Xian formation, but he didn't think of using any other methods. This Mu Yafeng was so powerful that she could make the 7th divine envoy do this for her. Chu Luiyue paused. Didn't the 7th divine envoy help to plead for mercy? How can the 7th divine envoy care about this? Now even he has been stripped of the right to control the star path. By the way, you just came back, so you don't know about this. Chu Luiyue didn't know what to say for a moment. She had only been away for a short period of time, and so many things had happened. Then who is in charge of the star path now? I heard that it was handed over to the 5th divine envoy. But the 5th divine envoy isn't a Xian master, and I don't know why the 1st divine envoy chose him. We all thought that he would choose the 11th divine envoy, who is also a Xian master. Chu Luiyue's eyebrows twitched. By the way, the 9th and 10th divine envoys left the divine gate. Have they returned? Xiao Ran nodded. They returned a long time ago. But these two aren't in the illusory god palace now, but in the illusory god ocean. I heard that they made some mistakes, but we don't have the right to ask, and we only know the general idea. Mistakes? Chu Liyue was stunned. Was it because they didn't succeed in bringing back the music score? But at that time in the god-slaying tomb, the two disappeared inexplicably. She didn't expect that they would be locked in the illusory god ocean after returning. She suddenly thought of something and asked, Senior Xiaoran, have you seen the first divine envoy? He had even seen Lan Xiao and the others. Logically speaking, he should have some understanding of the first divine envoy, right? Xiaoran paused. Are you asking about the previous one or the current one? Digression 6 o'clock. Chapter 2344. Chu Liyue blinked and asked curiously, You've met these two before? Xiaoran nodded then shook his head. You can say that. But I've only seen them from afar. I don't really know them. Not to mention the previous one. He was still young at that time, and didn't have much of an impression of him. And the current one. She was also very low-key and mysterious, rarely showing her face. Although Xiaoran had stayed in the illusory god palace for a long time, he hadn't fully comprehended all the Xian formations on the star path, and entered the illusory god palace. So he hadn't been able to get close to the first divine envoy. Not to mention him, even the other divine envoys couldn't see the first divine envoy's face in recent years. I wonder what the first divine envoy is busy with. I can't describe it, but if I see him, I'll definitely recognize him. Chu Liyue pursed her lips, feeling a little disappointed. Seeing her reaction, Xiaoran couldn't help but laugh. Why? You seem to be very curious about the first divine envoy? Chu Liyue's lips curved. There shouldn't be anyone in the illusory god palace who isn't curious about this, right? Actually, if you really want to see him, you can wait a few more months. Xiaoran raised his chin. The gate of heaven will open for a year. When the time is up, the gate of heaven will close. At that time, all the cultivators in the illusory god palace can enter the illusory god palace. At that time, all the divine envoys will appear, including the first divine envoy. Chu Liyue's eyes flickered. Really? Of course. This is the old rule of the illusory god palace. The gate of heaven opens once every 10,000 years, and every time, it will attract many cultivators. But in the end, only a few can ascend to the heavens and become gods. There's no need to talk about those who succeed. Those who fail are either driven out of the gate of heaven and left to fend for themselves, or forced to stay here and continue to cultivate, waiting for the next gate of heaven to open. But there aren't many who can really endure it. Chu Liyue suddenly understood. So the opportunity to ascend to the heavens and become gods only comes once every 10,000 years. Yes, Xiaoran said with a self-mocking smile. My strength and luck were both a little lacking. I stayed at the final profound formation for several years, but I still didn't make any progress. Even after so long, he still hadn't succeeded. To be honest, I don't even know how long I've been waiting. Over time, he had come to terms with it. It would be best if he could comprehend the Xian formation, complete the star path, and enter the illusory god palace to wait for his breakthrough. If I can't do it, I'll just muddle along. Chu Liyue said softly. You can definitely do it. Xiaoran didn't care about it, and placed his hands behind his head. Forget it, there's nothing much to see here. Let's go back. Chu Liyue and the others returned to their residence. However, Mao Jin did not travel with them. Instead, she chose a different direction. It probably had something to do with the great phoenix dragon's ancestor. So Chu Liyue did not ask further. Rong Xiu was resting in the room, but Yin Qing had already disappeared. Hearing the footsteps, Rong Xiu looked up. Has the matter at the Yuntian Tower been resolved? Chu Liyue asked. Rong Xiu nodded. It's all a small matter. Don't worry. As for you, I heard that Senior Lan Xiao appeared? Yes. Chu Liyue's expression turned serious, as she briefly repeated what happened. Luckily it was a close call. Senior Lan Xiao should be temporarily safe for a period of time after this. It's a pity that he's trapped in the illusory god palace. It's really difficult to find where he's imprisoned. It's even more difficult to rescue him. Rong Xiu kissed her forehead. The more it's like this, the more we can't be too hasty. I know. Chu Liyue sighed softly and then said, Besides, I really didn't expect Senior Lan Xiao to be the second priest of the illusory god palace, and Debao. Diwu Zhang's identity could not be confirmed yet, but there was no doubt that these two people were priests. Rongxiu lowered his eyes and did not speak. Chu Luiyue thought for a while and said, "The illusory god palace is also searching for the music score. Now that I'm back, there's no reason they don't know that it's with me now. Why haven't they done anything yet?" Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. "The music score has already recognized you as its owner. Even if they want to snatch it, can they?" "That's true." Now Chu Luiyue had the upper hand. The music score was obviously very important to the illusory god palace. The more important it was, the more cautious they would be and would not dare to act rashly. Especially now that the three music scores were all with her. They had become Chu Luiyue's life-saving trump card. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment and said, "I plan to rest for a while first, then directly complete the star path, and officially enter the illusory god palace." Rongxiu looked at her. "Okay. When the time comes, I'll go with you." Lan Zhao's matter could be considered to have come to an end for the time being. After the commotion, Chu Luiyue was much more relieved. Debao and Lan Zhao's identities were so special, and it was obvious that they had a certain trump card that made the other party wary. In that case, there would be ample room to make more preparations for the rescue of them. As for Diwu Zhangzi, although he was not a priest, he was locked up together with Debao and Lan Xiao, so there was probably some connection between them. At least now they knew where he was locked up. Chu Luiyue had just taken back the last music score, so she planned to use this time to integrate the third music score. In the room, Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged, surrounded by a layer of silver-red flowing light. Soon, a stone rolled out from the universe ring on her hand and floated quietly in the divine realm. The space around the stone distorted for a moment, but it quickly returned to normal. Then the second stone, the third stone. Soon, Chu Luiyue was surrounded by these stones. She closed her eyes, and her thick and long eyelashes trembled slightly. The bright light shone on her face, and her skin was clear and white like jade. She followed the tone of the music in her memory, and began to arrange the stones around her. She had heard the complete music score once in the god-slaying tomb, so what she needed to do now was to integrate these scattered pieces of music, and then combine them with the first two pieces. Chapter 2345. This was easier said than done. Chu Luiyue had tried it once in the god-slaying mound, but she did not succeed. The third score had been cut too thoroughly. She held her breath and raised her hands gently. The stones began to arrange themselves in a certain order. However, even if Chu Luiyue followed the tune she heard and placed them in the correct position one by one, it did not go as smoothly as she had expected, because there seemed to be an invisible barrier between these stones, and they even faintly contradicted each other. The more stones gathered together, the more obvious this resistance was. Chu Luiyue's brows gradually furrowed. Finally, at a certain moment, the stones in front of her scattered with a loud bang. Chu Luiyue opened her eyes. She realized that with her current strength, it was basically impossible for her to completely control it. Even if she was already a god, when these stones did not listen to her, she really could not do anything about it. Every single one of them contained the aura of a Tao sovereign. Chu Luiyue was not satisfied and tried a few more times. But no matter what method she used, the final result was the same. In the end, Chu Luiyue finally chose to give up. Forget it. She stood up and put away the divine territory and the stones. It was probably useless to force it now. She lifted her feet and walked out. Treasure Pavilion, second floor. In the room, Yen Ge was lying on a small couch, playing with a divine weapon in his hands in boredom. Sigh. He let out a long sigh and turned over. When will these days come to an end? Ever since he returned to the Illusion God Palace, he had been on the second floor for a long time, not daring to step out of the door. Who would not feel suffocated? Knock knock. Second master. That was Mingshu's voice. Yen Ge said lazily. Come in. Zhao pushed the door open and came to Yen Jiyi's side, handing over the things in his hands. Second master, This is this month's account book. Please take a look. Yan Ji's eyelids twitched. There hasn't been much business this month. What's there to look at? Tisk. Although the number of people who came here to buy herbs had decreased after the herb mountain reopened, there were still many other businesses in the store. Is it really okay for you to be so casual? Yenga glanced at him. Are you scolding me? Mingshu immediately said. This subordinate dares not. Yenga snorted, but still took the account book and flipped it open. You can hide your thoughts a little deeper. His lips twitched, and he cleverly changed the topic. Second master, you've been here for a long time. Why hasn't the first master said anything? At the mention of this, Yenga felt wronged. He let out a long sigh. Sigh, there's nothing we can do about it. Since his master had given his orders, he naturally had to obey. However, I heard that Madam has been quite active recently. I reckon that victory is in sight. Mingshu smiled. I heard that second master and Madam are old acquaintances. When he sees you, he will definitely be very happy. Yan Ji's brows twitched. Hiss. Based on his understanding of that person, if he knew that the second master of Treasure Pavilion was him, then, when the time came, would he still have a way out? Thinking of this, Yenga hurriedly said, No hurry, no hurry. It wouldn't be too late to talk about this when his master also decided to show up. At least he could block it for a while, right? As Yenga spoke, he flipped a few more pages and couldn't help but rub his forehead. Sigh. I really don't want to read this. If the third oracle is still... His voice stopped abruptly. Mingshu's expression changed slightly. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a commotion outside. Master Mingshu? It was Chu Liuyue's voice. Yengo and Mingshu quickly exchanged glances. Yengo was quick to react. He stuffed the account book back into Mingshu's hands and disappeared in a flash. His actions were as fast as lightning. Mingshu. Master Mingshu, are you there? Chu Liyue waited on the first floor for a while. Seeing that there was no one, he decided to go upstairs to take a look. After calling out twice, Mingshu finally pushed open a door and walked out. Miss Shengguanyu. Call me Madam Rong, Chu Liyue said. Since Rong Xiu was here, this title was more appropriate. Mingshu's eyelids twitched. Yes, madam. Chu Liyue vaguely felt that it was a little strange. She wanted to correct him, but thought that it wasn't a big deal, so she didn't mention it. Master Mingshu, I'm here this time to copy the rest of the mythical flame diagram. Mingshu had expected that she was here for the mythical flame diagram, but he was still stunned when he heard her words. All of it? Chu Liyue nodded slightly. There seemed to be a faint glow in his clear black eyes. Yes, all of it. Peach Blossom Cove. You mansion. Sanson held the account book and walked unsteadily through the corridor with small steps. Suddenly, his nose felt itchy and he sneezed. Achoo! This sound made him dizzy and his vision blurred. Damn, who's talking about me behind my back? He subconsciously looked at the silver bridge in the sky. Sigh, I wonder how Master and the others are doing now. At this moment, Wu Yao hurried over. Third brother. Sanson rubbed his nose. When he turned around, he saw that Wu Yao's expression was a little strange. He blinked his small eyes. What's wrong? What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Wu Yao quickly walked to him and said in a low voice. Third brother, there's a problem in the Taoist world. Chapter 2346. When Sanson heard this, he immediately put away the account book. What's going on? Before Master left, he had instructed him to guard the door realm well. If something really happened, he had to solve it quickly. Wu Yao shook his head. It's hard to explain in a few words. Third brother, come with me to take a look. Now that big brother and second brother were not in Peach Blossom Cove, Sanson was the one in charge. Moreover, Sanson was the most familiar with this place. Sanson nodded. Let's go. Let's not delay. The two of them walked straight, and soon arrived in front of the door realm. Yu Jio was holding a wooden sword in his arms and waiting there. When he saw the two of them, he immediately went forward. Third brother, fifth brother. Sanson looked at the barrier and was shocked. This, the gate realm, which was originally transparent, was now flowing with vibrant colors and resplendent lights. The specks of light gathered together, forming a huge round mirror. On the edge of the mirror, complicated and exquisite patterns could be vaguely seen. They were mysterious and powerful. On the surface of the mirror, a silver light flickered. It was so dazzling that one could not open their eyes and look directly at it. When Sanson saw this scene, he was also stunned on the spot. He stared at the mirror for a long time. This mirror looked extremely heavy and sacred, but it was embedded in a thin layer of the door realm. It looked a little strange. When did this appear? This morning, Wu Yao said. After seeing it, I called Yu Jiu to guard here. I went to look for you, third brother. This matter was obviously not right. He did not dare to be negligent. Sanson took a step forward and immediately felt a strong pressure spreading out from it. It was difficult to get close. Upon closer inspection, the void near the door realm seemed to be affected by the mirror and was slightly distorted. Sanson frowned. Third brother, shouldn't we report this to Master as soon as possible? Yu Jiu asked. Sanson nodded. Of course I do. He turned back to look at the two of them with a conflicted expression. But who should we send? Wu Yao and Yu Jiu looked at each other. The two of them had been taking turns to guard this door realm. Of course, it was more suitable for them to do this. I'll go. Wu Yao pondered for a moment and said. Speaking of which, this is the first time I've seen such a situation. I'll try my best to explain it to Master. Sanson nodded in agreement, but felt a headache coming on. But if you leave, won't Yu Jiu be the only one left here? There were many strong martial artists in the Peach Blossom Cove, but their master valued this realm very much. Thus, they tacitly agreed to entrust it to the 13U sect. Presently, Sun Yi and the rest had all followed Chu Luyue to the illusory god palace, leaving only the few of them to guard the Peach Blossom Cove. It would be difficult to choose a suitable person to guard the gate realm. At this moment, a sound suddenly came from a mountain peak not far away. The three of them looked up at the same time and saw a thin and tall figure standing at the top of the mountain. The surrounding heaven and earth energy was rapidly surging towards him. That's Little 13? Yu Jiu asked in surprise. Is he going to break through? That's him. Wu Yao narrowed his eyes. This child has been going out early and coming back late recently. I didn't expect him to break through now. Sanson rubbed his round palms. I remember that Little 13 should have broken through to become a rank 9 warrior, right? TSK, how long has it been since he broke through? Little 13's talent is not to be underestimated. Boom! As he spoke, a majestic aura suddenly spread from Little 13's body. He had officially become a rank 9 warrior. Sanson nodded in satisfaction. Not bad, not bad. I'll pick some good pills for Little 13 to stabilize his realm. Yu Jiu glanced at him faintly. It's rare for third brother to be so generous. Usually, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens for them to take anything from him. However, third brother was extremely good to Little 13. Sanson snorted. Can you compare to Little 13? This child. Whoosh! Before he could finish his sentence, Sanson suddenly realized that the surrounding heaven and earth energy had begun to surge towards Little 13 at an even faster speed. The abundant energy surged like a tide, causing a huge commotion. Wu Yao suddenly realized something, and his eyes lit up. Little 13 is going to break through consecutively? Now that he was a rank 9 warrior, he would be an exalted god. Yu Jiu took 2 steps forward and realized that it was true. With this momentum, he was definitely going to break through to become an exalted god. Damn! Breaking through to become an exalted god from a rank 9 warrior is a qualitative leap. He didn't even prepare at all, and just did it directly? Yu Jiu's face was filled with envy and resentment. I'm jealous. Back then, in order to cross the threshold of becoming an exalted god, he had spent a lot of effort and lost count of how many wooden swords he had used. Now Little 13 just had to stomp his feet. Wu Yao glanced at Sanson. Third brother, Little 13 is going to become an exalted god. He's not a child anymore, right? How could there be such a heaven-defying child? Sanson, I'm jealous too. Wu Yao. Boom. The sound of thunder rolled out from the clouds. The three of them stood in place and waited patiently, intending to wait for little 13 to break through before doing anything else. After all, this was not something that could be passed so easily. It was better to see it with their own eyes. However, they soon realized that something was wrong. In the sky, after the sound of thunder fell, Tianlei did not gather. What's going on? Yujio frowned. Since little 13 wanted to break through to become an exalted god, he must be confident enough. But why couldn't he summon a single Tianlei? Suddenly, Sanson slapped his thigh. I remember now. The two of them looked at him in unison. Sanson explained with a frown. Recently, the cultivators in Peach Blossom Cove have been unable to summon Tianlei. You two have been stationed here, so you might not know, but I've heard of a few similar situations. It's not just the exalted gods, but also those who are preparing to break through to become exalted gods. No matter what they do, they can't summon even half of Tianlei's power. It's just that I've been busy before, so I forgot about it. At first, Sanson didn't really take this matter to heart. However, judging from little 13's current situation, it was much more serious than he had expected. None of them worked. Wu Yao and Yujio were shocked. They looked at each other. Then what's going on? You know, without the tempering of Tianlei's power, it's very difficult to break through. Even if they could do it, there would be some problems. Sanson scratched his head anxiously. This clang. The sound of something shattering suddenly came from the sky. Chapter 2347. The three of them looked over and saw a silver Tianlei in the sky. It was heading straight for little 13. Where did this Tianlei come from? Sanson was stunned and subconsciously raised its head to take a look. What the hell? This Tianlei didn't come from the sky, but flew over from an unknown place. Moreover, it appeared too suddenly. Will there be a problem? I think we should go and stop that Tianlei, Yujio said as he gripped the hilt of his sword tightly. However, he had just taken half a step when a second Tianlei came. It was also heading for little 13. At the same time, an inexplicably familiar aura came. Wu Yao narrowed his eyes and raised his hand to stop Yujio. Wait! Yujio was stunned and looked at him strangely. Wu Yao raised his head. Don't you feel that this movement seems like I've seen it before? Yujio blinked. Sanson, however, suddenly thought of something, and a great panic appeared in its small eyes. No way! That little ancestor is here. Chi! Another silver Tianlei suddenly appeared. Wu Yao said calmly. Not just one but two. Sanson turned around and ran. Wu Yao had already expected this, and didn't stop him. He only raised his voice and asked, Third brother, they're already here. Where can you run to? Don't forget that the flowers and plants in Qingshui Cliff still need you. Sanson stopped in his tracks, and his face was full of pain. He wanted to run because he felt sorry for those treasures. Yujio saw the reaction of the two, and suddenly realized something. His face was full of joy. It's the two of them. Wu Yao laughed. Who else could it be? Yujio said excitedly. Third brother. Then hurry up and get ready. We haven't seen each other for so long. Why don't you give them a greeting gift or something? Sanson wanted to cry but had no tears. So it's not you guys who are bleeding. While the three of them were talking, a few more silver Tianlei appeared one after another. 13 was still in a daze at first, but when the first Tianlei arrived in front of him, he immediately realized something, and was pleasantly surprised. Then, without hesitation, he drew the Tianlei into his body, and began to refine his divine body. Although Tianlei did not descend from the sky, it still contained an astonishing amount of power. 13's entire body was in intense pain, as if every inch of his flesh, blood, and bones were being torn apart. However, he could only grit his teeth and swallow all of it. At the same time, he tried his best to convert all of it into his own strength. Then came the second and the third. Numerous Tianlei surged forth and shone brightly, almost completely enveloping 13's figure. However, the aura on his body continued to rise. Finally, when the last ray of silver light entered his body, he suddenly opened his eyes. A shocking aura burst out from his body. At this point, 13 had finally broken through and entered the high god realm. Not a demigod. It's the exalted god. Yujio couldn't hide her excitement. Little 13 is indeed powerful. Wu Yao's face was filled with satisfaction and admiration. As expected of Big Brother's personal disciple, such a young high god should be a rare existence in the entire Divine Ruins world, right? On the mountaintop, the fluctuations around 13 gradually calmed down. He looked in the direction of the Tianlai. A joyful smile appeared on the young man's handsome face. 11th sister, 12th sister. As soon as he finished speaking, two figures quickly flew over from afar. They were two young girls who looked no more than 15 or 16 years old. They wore the same dress, but one was pink, and the other was lake green. When they stood together, they contrasted nicely, and looked very beautiful. However, most importantly, those two young women were both very beautiful. They were extremely beautiful. They were actually a pair of twins. However, although the two of them looked exactly the same, their auras were very different. The girl in the lake green dress had a cold expression and a strong aura. The other girl seemed to be a little timid and obedient as she followed behind the girl in the lake green dress. The two of them stepped on a sword and were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of 13. 13 went forward to welcome them. The two girls showed the same smile on their faces. The difference was that one went from being cold to being gentle, and the other went from being soft to being cute. Congratulations, 13. The girl in the lake green dress said. Her voice was as bright and clear as her appearance. 11th sister, I should be the one thanking you. If it wasn't for your help just now. 11th sister waved her hand. We're all brothers, no need to be so polite. 13 was speechless. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he finally said, It's been so many years, 11th sister, you haven't changed at all. 12th sister quietly tugged at 11th sister's clothes and whispered, Sister, it's brother and sister. 11th sister raised an eyebrow. What's the difference? 12th sister shrunk her head and whispered, Yes. 13 laughed dryly, and then he was surprised to find. 11th sister, 12th sister, you've also become high gods? We broke through not too long ago. If not for this, we wouldn't have come back so late. 11th sister explained. 13 nodded in understanding. By the way, that Tianlai just now, he still couldn't figure out how they managed to send so many bolts of heavenly lightning over. He thought that he wouldn't make it today. 11th sister's face was expressionless. Oh, that's nothing. We just broke an Emperor Divine artifact, and took out the power of Tianlai from it for you. 13 was speechless. In the distance, Sanson heard this and wanted to leave. Emperor Divine artifact. It was destroyed just like that. These two little ancestors were so full of themselves now. However, at this moment 12th sister looked over. Third brother and the other seemed to be here too. Although there was some distance between them, it would be a lie to say that they couldn't see or hear. Yujio was very happy. Third brother, fifth brother. What are you waiting for? Let's go. It's been so long since we last saw them. After he finished speaking, he took a step forward, tipped his toes, and headed straight over. Wu Yao glanced at Sanson and reminded him. Third brother. 11th sister doesn't like people to be late. After saying that, he also followed after her. Sanson took a deep breath and prepared himself mentally for a long time. He stretched out his hand and put on a smile before turning around to follow. Don't be afraid. Maybe these two little ancestors have grown up and won't be as ignorant as before. With that thought, Sanson finally felt more at ease. They were not slow, and soon reached the top of the mountain. 11th sister, 12th sister, Yujio laughed. We haven't seen each other for so long. Did you miss 9th brother? No, I did. The two girls spoke in unison. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.